Chapter 133, Thieving Skills. Aya, I am Wu Jiaji. As soon as I saw brother, I felt particularly familiar. Could it be we were brought together by the karma between our previous incarnations? Come, let us later drink some wine and become sworn brothers. As soon as Taoist priest Qing Wen had finished speaking, this happily smiling chap suddenly scurried over and threw himself in front of Han Li. He extended a hand to firmly grasp Han Li's arm, and then said these words with a face of deep emotion. Han Li was initially startled, but soon after he softly smiled. It's not that we can't be brothers, but can you not touch my body so casually with your hand? My tastes are quite ordinary. I don't have even the slightest interests in beautiful young men. Han Li mockingly said with a slight smile. An arm was suddenly raised into the air and turned over by Han Li. It was grabbed by the wrist as quick as lightning. This wrist had already been secretly extended halfway into Han Li's front jacket. Cough, cough, this is truly strange. How did my hand run off into brother's bosom? It was definitely impatient to greet brother Han once I saw him. The youth separated from Han Li on the spot. First he blushed with a surprised complexion, but after a few dry coughs and a few murmurs, he slowly withdrew his hand as if nothing had happened. Han Li did not have any intention of holding back the youth's wrist. When the youth used force, Han Li had voluntarily let go. At this time, Han Li had actually grew quite an interest toward this Wu Jiaji. He was obviously a cultivator, but he uses the thieving skills of a person from Jianghu. This pickpocketing of his was truly quite interesting. However, his technique was quite excellently practiced. Were it not Han Li but another cultivator, they would perhaps be truly unaware of his dirty trick. Surely quite a few people in this room had already suffered from his antics. Just as Han Li thought this, he heard Hu Pingu's schadenfreude-laced voice. Boy Wu, have you met your match? Brother Han actually caught you at the scene. Are you going to continue boasting that your thieving skills are top-notch with these petty thefts of yours? What about it? This young master is satisfied. You want me to steal from you one more time. What haven't I stolen? You don't have anything of the slightest value from head to toe. What have you come to Great South meeting for? Wu Jiaji harshly said, curling his lip. What did you say, brat? Did I not yet settle your debt the last time you stole from me? Hu Pingu suddenly jumped from her chair with an ashen complexion. In addition, her fully bearded husband, though he did not say anything, had his hand on the broadsword behind his back with eyes glaring at the youth. Han Li would later find out this Xingdali was actually a mute, and therefore relied on his wife for all his affairs. Enough, we are all cultivators and should remain amiable. You two back down, do not argue again. When Taoist priest Qing Wen saw this, he wrinkled his brow. However, after the words of conciliations were said, he solemnly said toward Jiaji, Brother Wu, I know your thefts are only for fun, but you must return the objects to their owner every time. You mustn't have malicious intention. However, if you continue to do this, you will provoke disaster sooner or later. Not all of your victims will be easy to deal with. If you were to offend somebody from a cultivator clan, it wouldn't be that we wouldn't want to help but rave that we simply couldn't. That is why you shouldn't pull these kinds of pranks anymore. When the youngster heard Taoist priest Qing Wen's heartfelt words, he could not help but feel embarrassed. He scratched the back of his head and sincerely mentioned, Actually, on the journey to the Great South Valley, I accidentally obtained these thieving skills. But because I found it amusing, I could not help but practice it subconsciously on everyone. However, since this brother Han could defeat this little brother, others at the Great Assembly should be much more difficult to deal with. That's why everyone should feel relieved, since this little brother will not play with his life, and will not use his stealing skills at the Great Assembly. When the Taoist priest heard the youngster's words, his face showed an overjoyed expression. Brother Wu's talent is quite outstanding. At this age, he's already trained to the great circle of 8th layer. He is the true genius among us cultivators. It's better that he behaves himself this way. This little brother will not let down Taoist priest Qing Wen's expectations. I request that everyone will better take care of me in the future. Wu Jiaji gave a deep salute to everyone individually. After doing so, the hatred towards him was resolved. Although Hu Pingu's face still had a somewhat angry expression, her complexion was much better than before. It seemed she had reluctantly accepted his goodwill. Taoist priest Qing Wen turned his head over and said to Han Li with a smile, I didn't think that brother Han who had just joined us would immediately perform such a great service. This humble Taoist wishes to thank you. Han Li faintly smiled and declined with a soft voice, What does this have to do with me? This matter was completely handled by Taoist priest. The Taoist priest shook his head with a smile and spoke no further. However, at this moment, the drone of an indistinct voice sounded out. Taoist priest, for what did you call us all over? Why doesn't this Buddhist monk join in? It turned out to be the fair-skinned fatty had uttered these words. However, this man was actually qualified to speak to Qing Wen in this manner. Han Li have been long aware that among them, the fatty had the greatest magic power, deeper than that of Qing Wen. That was why no one dared to mock the fatty's coarse words. Even that Wu Jiaji had a deadpan appearance and didn't show the slightest bit of difference. It seems this world of cultivators is just about the same as the secular Jianghu. Only those possessing strength will be respected, Han Li thought as he saw this jeer. He, Brother Huang is quite an impatient person. Very well, this humble Taoist will reveal the reason why he has called all of you here. Qing Wen waved his horsetail whisk and said without the slightest trace of anger. The Great South meeting has already passed half of its duration. It will be concluded in 10 days. Shouldn't everyone conclude their business? If you want to set up a vendor's stall, then it would be best if we do it together. That is why I sought to discuss this with everyone. As for Master Ku Sang, he already finished exchanging the items he brought. Therefore, he need again participate in this discussion. So it was like that. I should indeed exchange some items for a few spirit stones and buy a few other items. The people in the room started to whisper. After a lively discussion, everyone except Han Li expressed interest in setting up a street vendor's stall the next day. Brother Han does not wish to participate, Wu Jiaji asked, somewhat amazed. The others also looked toward Han Li with doubt. I initially only brought a few items with me. Last night, I happened to meet a few appropriate customers and already finished exchanging everything. That is why I don't plan to participate with you. With a calm look, Han Li indifferently explained. So it's like that. You really don't need to be bothered with us. Brother Han is truly fortunate to have finished exchanging his items after just arriving. Hu Pingu mentioned somewhat enviously. The others also shot Han Li an envious, you are truly lucky look. After Han Li heard this, he smiled and spoke no further. Taoist priest Qing Wen saw that business discussions were finished. He happily stood and said, we should all rest well tonight and wake up spirited tomorrow. I hope you will all earn good profits. Once everyone heard this, they also stood and smiled, preparing to leave. At this time, Taoist priest Qing Wen seemed to have remembered something. His expression suddenly turned serious, and he said to everyone, by the way, after the Great South meeting finishes, everyone shouldn't depart by themselves. I heard that after the past few Great South meetings ended, a few rogue cultivators such as ourselves disappeared without a trace. It would be better to be a bit more careful. It can be assumed that who is involved would not miss the opportunity to attend the Great Tian Wuda Immortal Ascension Assembly. Everyone should stay together to enhance their safety. After everyone heard the Taoist priest say rogue cultivators had gone missing, the High Brothers and Hu Pingu faces paled. Rogue cultivators Hong Lion and Wu Jiaji were bewildered. Fatty Huang Zai Ocean coldly snorted with a gloomy expression. Right, us brothers approve of Taoist priest Qing Wen's words. It would be better to stay together as a group. As a married couple, we do not disagree. Both the High Brothers and Hu Pingu with her husband agreed. It seemed they were greatly fearful toward this matter. Chapter 134, Great Immortal Ascension Assembly. Now is not the time to talk about some Immortal Ascension Assembly. The topic we should be discussing right now is regarding the issue of our fellow cultivators going missing. Hu Pingu said somewhat resentfully towards the youth. It's not a problem. Give Brother Wu a proper explanation. Maybe there are others who are unclear of the details about the Immortal Ascension Assembly. Taoist priest Qing Wen said with a smile, but Han Li felt that he was intentionally looking at Han Li. Han Li's heart trembled with fear. Could it be that Taoist priest Qing Wen saw through something? Han Li already tried his best to hide characteristics of a new immortal cultivator, and even go as far as to avoid touching certain people. But nowadays, it seemed that it was still unable to be concealed from these certain people's eyes. This Taoist priest Qing Wen's eyes were definitely really fierce. Since Taoist priest Qing Wen said it like that, then I better explain it properly to Brother Wu. Seeing this, High Mu's spirits were lifted, and he looked like he had a lot to say. So everyone returned to their original seats once again, except for Fatty Huang Zai Ocean. I already know about the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly. I will return to rest first, you guys go ahead. Fatty said with a cold expression. He did not wait for anyone else to speak and left the house, leaving behind a house full of people looking at each other in dismay. Everyone, don't take offense. Brother Huang's cultivation art is a bit weird, and he is relatively addicted to sleep. It is not that he intentionally treats people coldly. Qingwen, with irreproachable manners, hurriedly exonerated Huang Ziocean on his behalf. The majority of the people in the room who heard this all laughed bitterly. Take offense? Who dared to take offense? That person was a powerful man who had more magic power than the Taoist priest. The atmosphere in the room became somewhat awkward. Brother Hai Mu, please continue. Wu Jiaji broke the atmosphere as he urged on. Hai Mu heard it and laughed, then continued to talk about it. When talking about Great Immortal Ascension Assembly, one must mention the Foundation Establishment Pill, the medicine pill that makes all the Qi condensation stage cultivators go mad. In order for a Qi condensation cultivator were to enter Foundation Establishment and become a part of the true cultivating world, aside from cultivating their Foundation cultivation techniques to the 7th layer, they still needed to consume the spirit medicine, Foundation Establishment Pill, which only major sects could manufacture. Only then would there be hope of breaking through the bottleneck of that realm and succeed into Foundation Establishment. This contributed to Foundation Establishment Pill's famous name, Immortal Ascension Pill, making those immortal cultivators go mad. Even in the immortal cultivator major factions, the Foundation Establishment Pill was in critically short shortage. Because the Foundation Establishment Pill's raw materials were extremely hard to find, even if all the cultivators sects throughout the entire state of UA collaborated and acted together to provide materials and great effort every 10 years, they could only hope to make a few new cauldron medicine pills, about 1,000 measly pieces. But even if all these medicine pills were to be divided equally among every faction, there would be no way to satisfy their own needs. As a result, the Foundation Establishment Pill never appeared outside the world of cultivators. However, in the cultivating world of the entire state of UA, there were still a lot of existing cultivators who practiced their Foundation cultivation techniques until the 7th layer. These people were in urgent need of Foundation Establishment Pills to attempt to break through the bottleneck. Thus, on one hand, because of the shortage of Foundation Establishment Pills, the big sects had monopolized the medicine pill. On the other hand, there was an increasing number of rogue immortal cultivators that were in need of Foundation Establishment Pills, but could not find a single piece in the outside world. There were already conflicting views from both sides very early on, so much so that at one time, there was deep animosity from short-tempered minor immortal cultivators towards these sects. Those from the major immortal cultivator factions naturally became aware of the poor outlook of the situation, but they couldn't do anything about it for the time being. After all, they didn't have enough Foundation Establishment Pill for themselves, so how could they take out some and give them to outsiders? But in this whole world, there were no difficult problems that couldn't be solved. Eventually in this crisis, there was an unknown genius from a sect who solved it. Unexpectedly, he thought an idea. Every time there were freshly manufactured Foundation Establishment Pills, major sects would pick out outstanding rogue cultivators from the outside world, allow them to join the major sects, and give them the Foundation Establishment Pill to consume. This way, the sects could stem the outflow of Foundation Establishment Pill, thereby preventing manure water from flowing to other fields. This also eliminated the dissatisfaction of minor immortal cultivators. After all, to be able to join one of the major immoral cultivator factions, how could these cultivators not be content? The factions could even pick out disciples who have outstanding aptitudes. It truly was a good situation that could satisfy everyone. TL. Lit. Don't let one's own fertile water flow into others' field, keep the valuables within the family. But the method of selection must be fair and strict to prevent any disputes caused by gossips. If not, there would be an opposite effect. Hence, the sects would choose their elites and use arena-style combat to let newcomers strive for the chance to enter their sects. Each of the 7 great sects would take 10 disciples and 10 pieces of Foundation Establishment Pills to award the final victors. Naturally, they would set an age limit. Anyone above 40 years old would not be allowed to enter. Even though these people may have good aptitudes, their future prospects in cultivation would not be good. This was how the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly was born. The majority of the people who were able to obtain victory in the arena were those with profound magic power as well as talented individuals with aptitudes surpassing others, making those immortal cultivator sects very pleased to obtain these excellent quality disciples. All the grievances of the other immortal cultivators disappeared after the establishment of this great assembly. All their attention was focused on the once-in-a-decade opportunity to make a big break. Thus, the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly was organized in this way. And every time there would be 70 lucky winners who became disciples of the 7 great sects, making other immortal cultivators go even more frantic. At the end, almost all of the immortal cultivators who were of an appropriate age and were in the chi condensation stage felt that they are no weaker than their peers. They would go all out and try a few times to fight on the arena, hoping to gain an unexpected success and transform from a carp into a dragon. But this arena was not easy to beat since magic was not easy to control for these second-rate immortal cultivators. Each assembly would have a lot of dead or injured casualties, which also created intense rancor among the challengers. Haimu spent half a day talking about this. Jiaji, who was listening with keen interest, gained a lot from this. Han Li, who was sitting beside and listening in, benefited even more from this lecture and had a deeper understanding towards the world of cultivators. If I were to succeed, would I also be able to become a disciple of a major sect? After listening, Wu Jiaji's face was full of yearning. Are you dreaming? With your level, you would be dead if you tried to rush and grind even if you weren't injured. Hu Pingu ridiculed without restraint when she heard Wu Jiaji's words of reverie. Oh, why can't I do it? Although my cultivation art is at the 8th layer, am I still qualifications to get on stage and fight? Wu Jiaji did not get angry this time, and instead he consulted with Hu Pingu. Hu Pingu was somewhat shocked, but after hesitating for a while he said, Boy Wu, do you know what kind of people were in the 70 winners last time? And how many cultivators who were of similar caliber as yourself were injured or dead? I hope Lady Hu would be so kind as to give me a reply. Wu Jiaji replied rather sincerely. I witnessed the previous Great Immortal Ascension Assembly's entire battle, and there's still some lingering fear when I think about it. It was as if Hu Pingu remembered something very frightening as her complexion turned paler. When her fully bearded husband saw this, he immediately placed his hand on her shoulder to comfort her. Hu Pingu turned her head and lovingly looked at her husband, her complexion easing up. Both of us don't want to participate in the single elimination open tournament only to look. We are prepared to stay in chi condensation forever. Since you all still have ambitious goals, then let me tell you some cruel aspects of the tournament. Otherwise, you will die without ever knowing what happened to you, Hu Pingu said indifferently. Chapter 135 Frightening News. Chapter 135 Frightening News. First of all, those registering in the competition must have achieved the 7th layer of their 5 elements foundation cultivation technique. This is the minimum requirement to take a foundation establishment pill. Secondly, their age must be less than 40. Those surpassing this age shouldn't even think of slipping through, because those in charge of the Great Assembly's registrations are able to use bone observation techniques to look at every participant's true age. TL, 5 elements 5 phases, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So long as one follows those 2 conditions, then anyone can register. There are no other restrictions. As a result, however, these open single elimination tournaments become even more desperate. You think that the many people here at Great South Valley are ordinary. The majority of those here actually came here for the Immortal Ascension Assembly. It should be known that the Great South meeting was originally but a trade meet for the local young cultivators of the land province. During meetings in previous years, there were only several hundred people. Take a look. As of now, this valley has at least 1,000 people. In addition, people that come from even farther regions will arrive one after another during the last few days. During that time, the business of the Great South meeting will be at its highest level. These people are the reason why we've come to participate in the Great South meeting early. On one hand, we wish to exchange for a few necessary goods. On the other, how could one not want to take advantage of this opportunity? First, one may observe potential opponents of the Immortal Ascension Assembly. It is good to not only know ourselves but also know our enemies, Hu Pingu added with a bitter smile. When Wu Jiaji heard this, his complexion greatly changed, and he aghastly said, according to Lady Hu, there were experts in the valley that cultivated to the 10th layer in their cultivation technique. Will they also participate in the Immortal Ascension Assembly? What is there to compete in? Aren't those with lower cultivation courting death? This might not be certain. Who said that higher-tier experts would always beat those of lower tiers? Even if their magic power is slightly weaker, they can use a somewhat more powerful magic talisman or use some formidable magic tool that they're carrying to beat down those with greater magic power. From those who originally entered the room, Hai Jin, who had yet to speak, suddenly spoke out boldly, shocking everyone in the room. That's right, what Brother Hai-Jin said makes sense. In a war of cultivators such as ourselves, the slightest deepness or shallowness of one's magic power is not most important. What is most important is one's control of their magic might and its agile usage as well as the power they can draw from items they are carrying. Taoist priest Qing Wen said, completely agreeing. Brother Hai-Jin and Taoist priest Qing Wen's words must indeed hold some truth, otherwise this great immortal ascension assembly need not convene at all. They would only have to compare the depth of their magic power. Hu Pingu smiled. After hearing Hai-Jin and the others' words, Wai Jiaji still wasn't happy. With a brow of worry and a face on the verge of tears, he incessantly muttered, formidable magic tools, powerful magic talismans. Hu Pingu didn't take notice of Wu Jiaji at this time, but instead continued, saying, because there are too many people participating in the single elimination tournament, there will be 7 stages set up at the Immortal Ascension Assembly, representing the 7 great cultivator sects of the state of Yue. Whoever wishes to become that sect's disciple can advance onto the stage to compete. The match selection uses an instant win policy. 2 people will compete, the winner will stay for next stage, and the loser will be immediately eliminated. Then another 2 will have a match. This will continue until everyone competes once. Then they will start the next stage of the competition, which will continue until the final 10 remain. These 10 will become the cultivation sects, inner disciples, and need not to participate in the sect's greatly intense competition to obtain the qualifications to receive foundation establishment pills. It could be said to have reached the heavens with a single step. The course of the great Immortal Ascension Assembly tournament were as such. However, it is not as simple as I have said. In reality, the matches are a desperate sight to behold and are simply indescribable. After Hu Pingu said this, she let out a sorrowful sigh. I remember that in the fights from the last competition, there were 19 10th layer cultivators who died. Even a couple of 11th layer experts also met the same end by mutually taking one another down. As for 9th and 8th layer cultivators, those who died during the match were much greater in number. No less than 100 had died. After all, in the final several rounds, there would be no one that would lightly renounce their path to become a dragon. The number of dead and injured then would be even more tremendous. Having said this, Hu Pingu had an expression of regret. When one's foundation cultivation technique reaches the 11th layer, do they still have to go compete in a match? I've heard people say that cultivation sects voluntarily recruit these sort of outstanding talents. Why did those 2 people have to fight in a match as if their life depended on it? A woman's voice suddenly spoke. It was actually the habitually silent young woman, vagabond Hong Lion, that had spoken. When Hu Pingu heard her words, she smiled. I also had the same question as young sister Hong Lion during that particular year. I was completely puzzled despite a great amount of pondering. Afterwards, I met an old senior that was a rogue cultivator like us. His explanation allowed me to realize why. Brother Wu and Brother Han, it seems you also have this question. They are not the only ones who don't understand. Us 2 brothers also don't understand. 10th layer geniuses have a well-lit path that they do not walk. Why would they possibly want to insist on walking a small wooden plank? A moment of distraction will cause one's death. Hai Mu also tensed his brow with a face of puzzlement. I see Taoist priest Qing Wen is calm and composed. He probably figured this out already. How about Taoist priest come and explain it to them? Hu Pingu chuckled several times and lightly threw the question toward the Taoist priest. This somewhat surprised Taoist priest Qing Wen, but he immediately and silently conceded. After muttering to himself for a moment, he said, actually, those 2 were from cultivator clans. Their 11th layer cultivation was the result of consuming many medicinal pills. He shook his head, seemingly disapproving of the 2's methods. Is using medical pills to promote their cultivation level not a normal thing? They should still be able to join a cultivation sect. Wu Jiaji widely opened his eyes, somewhat unconvinced. Brother Wu forgot one thing. Those who are above 40 and have practiced to the 11th layer in their cultivation technique may be considered geniuses by us, but those ancient great sects see those people as having merely common talents. They would barely qualify to enter the sect as a reserve disciple. Otherwise, these people would have entered the large cultivation sects at an earlier time when they were younger as official disciples. It's just that their clan members felt that being able to barely enter a cultivation sect as such would have no future prospects. Therefore, they agreed to not compete against those disciples more talented than themselves for the qualifications to obtain foundation establishment pills, and simply stayed behind for closed-door cultivation. After several tens of years later, They would simply come out to the Immortal Ascension Assembly to amaze the world in a single feat and immediately acquire the qualifications to obtain a Foundation establishment pill through a shortcut. However, their clan hadn't expected that two with the same plan would coincidentally come across one another, resulting in mutual destruction. Were it not for that, their wishes were certain to have been fulfilled. While Taoist priest Qing Wen said this, he incessantly sighed. Everyone had attentively listened from the beginning. I've said that recent Immortal Ascension assemblies have grown more and more intense. 11th and 10th layer experts previously unheard of have appeared one after another. Hai Mu muttered to himself. Young Lady Hong Lion and Wu Jiaji were shocked silent. It was clear that this information had greatly surprised them. Think about it. On one side there are great experts meticulously nurtured and fully armed by cultivator clans. On the other hand there are us, destitute rogue cultivators. Do you think us rogue cultivators are more likely to succeed? Hu Pingu's expression was cold with slight self-deprecation. According to what was said, those cultivation sects obtain the disciples they want through the great Immortal Ascension Assembly. It is an overjoyous yet phony affair. Are we slapping our own face to look big and imposing? Han Li stroked his nose, seemingly in thought. Brother Han isn't wrong. In this world, what is 3 parts completely beautiful and good? Having 2 parts beautiful is good enough. Hu Pingu threw a glance at Hai Mu, making him faintly blush. Could it be us rogue cultivators are truly inferior to disciples of cultivator clans? Even those leftovers from the cultivator sects are that much stronger than us common rogue cultivators. Although I don't want to admit it, the odds of a master emerging from us rogue cultivators are far lower than that from the cultivator clans. Let alone a single one of us, all of our manpower and resources cannot be compared to ours. The conditions outside of a sect are far too lacking when compared, Taoist Qing Wen added somewhat bitterly. I've also heard from a friend that even if we were to luckily become a disciple of a cultivator sect and consumed a Foundation establishment pill, the number of those successful in achieving Foundation establishment is far too low, Hai Mu said dejectedly. Enough, everyone, don't be crestfallen. We are still young. If we are unsuccessful this time, we still have an opportunity in 10 years. Perhaps in the future we will enter a cultivator clan as a disciple. For now, let's talk about how we will gather together after the assembly. After Taoist priest Qing Wen let everyone blow off steam, he changed the subject. There is nothing to say. At that time, I will leave with everyone. After hearing about how amazing the people of the world of immortal cultivators are, I truly wouldn't dare to travel by myself. Taoist priest Qing Wen helplessly shook his head and looked toward vagabond Hong Lion. Chapter 136, Yang Clan. I will also travel with everyone, vagabond Hong Lion declared quite bluntly. Good, Brother Han, do you also plan go with us as well? Taoist priest Qing Wen had a happy appearance and then asked Han Li. When Han Li heard this, he hesitated. It would be reasonable to say that for a young person like him, it would be best to follow this small group. However, he didn't know why, but in his heart, he felt that something wasn't right. Had he truly made that decision, he was certain to regret it. I will decide after the conclusion of the trade meet. I am not anxious, Han Li said with a smile. He decided to first wait a bit before making a decision. Yi, Han Li's words clearly went against their expectations and shocked everyone. For what reason does Brother Han hesitate? Us rogue cultivators are together so that others can't bully us. What's even more is that Brother Han was able to see through my thieving skills. This little brother has much interest in swapping pointers with you at a later date, Wu Jiaji said somewhat dissatisfied. After Han Li heard the youth's words, he did not get angry. He only smiled and spoke no more. Brother Han didn't say that he was certain to not get along with us on the journey. He simply said that he wanted to think about it. That too is only natural, Taoist priest Qing Wen immediately mediated. That's right, Taoist priest Qing Wen spoke the words in my mind. I have a few secret problems that are truly somewhat difficult to say. That is why I must be a bit cautious. Han Li seemed to be very grateful towards Taoist priest Qing Wen and gave an expression that he was speaking from his heart. So it turned out I was just being meddlesome. The youth felt as if he had become ostracized and became displeased. Taoist priest Qing Wen helplessly smiled. With the look of an elder brother apologizing for a mischievous little brother, he inwardly apologized to Han Li. Han Li naturally did not take this matter to heart. Since this matter had already been resolved, everyone stood up one after another and took their leave. Han Li looked for an empty room on the second floor to retire for the night. On the second day, except for Han Li and the Buddhist monk, everyone else left the building and went together to the vendor stands. At this moment, the Buddhist monk was in the hall of the first floor meditating and chanting scriptures. Han Li was in his room, lightly stroking a dozen paper talismans and lost in thought. These so-called elementary, low-grade paper talismans have a slight flicker of spiritual light. They're largely different from the paper talismans of the secular world, not because the materials are special, but rather due to the addition of some kind of magic technique. Han Li thought. Han Li took out the paper talismans, which he originally planned to use in order to learn the soul lock technique. However, he suddenly remembered he couldn't seem to draw the soul lock talismans on the bright side. He still needed a writing brush and cinnabar sand, two items that seemed to be sold at vendor stalls. Could it be that these paper talismans couldn't be used in conjunction with secular objects and were limited to items unique to cultivators? With this thought, Han Li could not sit still in the room, so he decided to go find the Buddhist monk. In any case, he wouldn't be able to hide the fact he was a novice cultivator. He may as well calmly and directly ask. Amskiver's thoughts are correct. To successfully draft a spiritual talisman, apart from having to refine the talisman paper from special materials, you also must use a concoction of demonic beast blood and cinnabar. As for the writing brush, it depends on the situation. After Buddhist monk Ku Sang heard Han Li's question, he peacefully answered. TL. Amskiver is a title that Buddhist monks traditionally address others by. Master Ku Sang, what do you mean that it depends on the situation? Han Li earnestly asked, sitting across the monk. His appearance didn't hold the slightest amount of shame. Most of the brushes cultivators use to draft spiritual talismans, apart from those created from the spiritual hair from demonic beasts, are made of heavenly bestowed precious earthly charcoal. These can increase the rate of success when creating talismans as well as the talisman's might. However, if you do not have them, you can even use common secular brushes, but if you do, the rate of success is far too pitiful. The Buddhist monk lightly shook his head. He seemed to disapprove of Han Li, using that last method to refine talismans. Many thanks for Master's instructions. I will go out to see whether I can exchange for a brush to make talismans. Han Li stood and cupped his fist towards the Buddhist monk. Amskiver, take care. The Buddhist monk closed his eyes once more and continued the great undertaking of his meditation. It seemed he would have to go out today. He remembered that the brush and cinnabar were not inexpensive. It would cost approximately 6 or 7 low-grade spirit stones. Could it be that he would have to sell the flight talisman he had barely been able to acquire? Han Li thought this as he walked. People were also exciting the building and walked over to the marketplace. Since it was currently morning, cultivators on the road were grouped in 2 and 3s and were not at all lonely. However, they seemed to all be heading toward the marketplace. It appeared that the majority of them were like his own group, heading out to set up a vendor's stall. Quick look, a huge bird. A male cultivator suddenly cried out in alarm. Soon after, a large shadow swept across the road Han Li, and other cultivators were treading. Han Li was quite startled and hastily raised his head to look. He saw a two-headed monstrous bird about the size of a calf, flying past over him. This bird somehow seemed to resemble an eagle and also something else entirely. Gray feathers covered its entire body. Its wings were 7 feet wide, and it possessed a pair of sharp sickle-like claws. Above the neck were 2 bald, fierce bird heads with 4 eyes that glowed with a green light. What a frightening demonic bird! How unsightly! How large! Quickly capture it, it would make a great mount. The cultivators below stopped one after another and started to talk. It seemed that there were even a few eager to try to capture it. You don't value your lives. That is the 2-headed duck, a spiritual bird raised by the #1 cultivator clan, Guyu Mountain's Yang clan. It's certain to have a member of the Yang clan riding on it. Are you looking to bring about your own destruction? These ice-cold words woke up a few from their beautiful dreams. Yang clan, one of the large cultivation sects, the cultivator clan that hold core formation experts in reserve. Someone cried out. What other Yang clan is there? I came here a bit earlier and already saw the 2-headed duck. I also found out that a brother and sister from the Yang clan are participating in the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly's tournament, the cultivator said, proudly showing off. No, the Yang clan sent people to participate in the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly. Previously, they never sent anyone. If they did, then wouldn't there definitely be 2 less spots? That's right. If one were to come across the 2 from the Yang clan, it would be great misfortune. The complexion of these cultivators were somewhat unsightly, and a few even deeply sighed. Han Li coldly looked at the monstrous bird flying into the distance without speaking. After seeing this demonic bird, it was clear this was the monstrous eagle that Zai Tianyu had seen before, and the male and female immortals were the brother and sister from the Yan clan. Han Li grew deep in thought and passed through the rowdy nearby cultivators, going on his way. In the end, he faintly smiled and walked with ease. Currently, the people in the plaza were quite numerous. Although it could not compare with yesterday night's liveliness and bustle, it could be considered completely crowded. Han Li groped the pill medicine in his bosom and decided to see whether he could exchange this medicine for some items. As a result, he didn't enter from the entrance he previously used and entered the plaza from the other end. He planned to begin his stroll from the other side. On the way, Han Li occasionally browsed left and right, looking at vendor stalls, various materials and talismans. A few odd and wonderful magic tools also gave him a feast for the eyes. Suddenly, Han Li's footsteps stopped in front of some vendor's stall. He looked at a thin book on display, somewhat lost in thought. The tile showing the book's price noted, Eternal Spring Arts, Wood Attribute Foundation Cultivation Technique, costs 2 low-grade spirit stones. I want this book, Han Li calmly said to the vendor after he picked up this book and flipped through it. Chapter 137, Golden Sincerity Brush. 2 spirit stones, a clear melodious female voice reached Han Li's ear. Han Li was shocked. He discovered that the vendor sitting across from him with their head buried in a book was actually a sweet and charming young lady. This book doesn't have anything missing, Han Li asked after he recovered. Nothing. First through 13th layer of the Eternal Spring Cultivation Art is completely there, with not a single missing line. The young lady answered with an easygoing manner. Han Li nodded his head, then he flipped through several pages before closing the book. Would you exchange it for medicine pills? Han Li asked straightforwardly. Medicine pills? The young lady was somewhat stunned, widely opening her beautiful eyes. It depends on the medicine. If it's for healing or illness, it will be extremely costly, the young girl spat out as she stroked her forehead. Hearing this young lady's words, Han Li knew this matter was of great importance and bluntly handed over a bottle of yellow dragon pellets. Consolidation medicine, it can progress one's magic power, Han Li said assuredly. Consolidation medicine. The young woman, who was originally calm, grew somewhat tense. She moved toward Han Li and lightly took the jade bottle. She tossed out a medicine pill and lowered her head to smell the medicinal quality. Han Li stood above her and clearly saw the young lady's exposed, flawless neck. In addition, because the young woman was too close to him, the scent of a refined clan daughter assailed his nose and caused Han Li's heartbeat to involuntarily speed up. His complexion also grew slightly red. It truly is a medicine pill that can progress one's magic power. A moment after the young woman smelled it, she shouted with pleasant surprise. She raised her head and looked at Han Li with a happy expression, expectantly saying, "Do you still have more of this medicine pill? If so, I will exchange for how much you have. You can select the things in my stall as you wish. If there is nothing that will do, I can also purchase it with spirit stones." With this said, the young woman tightly held the medicine bottle. Her eyes were unblinkingly fixed onto Han Li, afraid that she would hear him say no. Seeing the charming and gentle young woman suddenly tense up, Han Li found it funny. However, he could not help but think to himself that he had underestimated the value of this medicine pills a bit. In the future, he should be a bit more prudent. Young woman, don't be anxious. First, let's finish the business before us. Will it be fine to talk about it further then? Han Li originally thought to refuse her. However, when he saw the clear expression in her eyes, he unknowingly recalled his little sister all of a sudden. His heart softened for a moment and those words slipped out. I am truly embarrassed. I've somewhat forgotten my manners. The young woman seemed to have become aware of her lack of manners, and her complexion turned scarlet. This book only requires 2 pills of this kind of medicine, the young lady said after she calmed down. When Han Li heard this, he felt that her price could be regarded as fair, so he agreed. Then his gaze swept across the other goods in her stall. What is this? An unremarkable small gray bag piqued Han Li's interest. This bag was unusual. The bag's opening was bound tightly by a thin red rope, and its interior was bulging. Han Li reached out to grab it. This is a bag of 7-star grass seeds. 7-star grass of 10 years or more is the best material to create paper talismans, the young lady clearly said. Han Li's heart was moved. This would be quite useful. However, he put it down in front of him without the slightest hesitation. The other items seem to be of no use to me, Han Li slowly said after looking through once more. You truly won't select anything else. This cold ice talisman is quite power. There is also this returning spring talisman. It can restore a great portion of your physical strength. The young lady was somewhat resigned and took the initiative to give Han Li recommendations. Having seen the young woman's, "You're young and naive so you don't know" appearance, Han Li could not help but laugh. What's so funny? The young woman blushed once more. I actually only wanted to buy cinnabar powder and a brush for drawing talismans. Unfortunately, you have neither here. Han Li spoke the rarely said truth. Cinnabar powder and talisman drawing brush. The young lady wrinkled her brow and exclaimed somewhat hesitantly. She lowered her head and muttered to herself for a moment. It greatly seemed that she had made up her mind. Suddenly, she raised her head toward Han Li and said, I don't have cinnabar powder, but I have a top-quality talisman brush made from the neck hair of the demonic beast, golden-eyed ape. However, its price is quite high. I don't know if you have enough medicine pills to exchange for it. When Han Li heard this, he was somewhat amazed. However, he kept smiling and said, So long as it is good, I will be able to satisfy young lady with regards to the medicine pills. When the young lady heard this, she felt relieved. She took out a spiritual talisman and used her hand to make several cutting motions over the talismans. She then threw it into the air, and it disappeared in a blaze. Your esteemed self, please wait a moment. My elder brother will bring it shortly, the young woman added, somewhat embarrassed. No problem. So long as it is truly a good item, I don't care about waiting for a bit longer, Han Li calmly said. After this, Han Li and the young woman had nothing to say during this time, which caused them feel a rather ambiguous feeling. Han Li actually somewhat indulged in this peculiar feeling and faintly smelled her delicate fragrance as he breathed. The young lady had her head lowered and was looking at the end of her feet. It was unknown what she was thinking. However, when Han Li saw her spotlessly white neck, he blushed a bit. Little sister, a large voice abruptly shattered the subtle atmosphere, causing Han Li to not help but want to ferociously glare at the voice's owner. However, when Han Li turned around, he could not help but start after he clearly saw the figure approaching. He was a large, tall, and sturdy man with a stature no less than that of Crooked Soul. He was currently rushing toward them. On the way, he bumped into a few cultivators who swaying side to side. Those cultivators were originally angry. However, after seeing the huge man's far beyond normal stature, they all exposed an expression of shock and hesitated. Without a better option, they pinched their nose and let it go. When the young woman saw the large man's actions, she had a bit of a headache. Her elder brother's behavior was far too rude and careless. Did this not give cause and reason for other cultivators to arouse dislike for him? This is for little sister. I brought the items over. The huge man was enveloped with a squall as he charged toward Han Li's side. He extended his hand, which was the size of a palm leaf fan, and revealed a slender wooden box that he handed over to the young woman. The young lady inwardly complained about her elder brother's rudeness and carelessness. Then she handed over the wooden box toward Han Li, indicating that Han Li should open it and examine the contents. Han Li took the case. After taking a glance at the young woman, he opened the case, exposing a golden brush that emitted a faint yellow light from tip to shaft. This brush is called Golden Sincerity. Its tip was created from the neck hair of the Grade 2 demonic beast golden-eyed ape, and its shaft was created from a blend of gold essence and crow iron. Then it was refined under a foundation establishment cultivator's well-earned ritual fire for 3 days and 3 nights. Only then was this brush successfully completed. The young woman softly explained. However, this woman stared at the brush with an expression that she was reluctant to part with it. Although he didn't completely understand what the young woman said, he knew this brush was not at all ordinary and had a great origin. He couldn't help but feel amazed that she was willing to part with this object. Could it be for those medicine pills? This young woman truly wants to exchange this brush with me. This is an impressive treasure. Han Li used his finger to lightly stroke the smooth shaft and looked at the engraving on brush's tip. Golden Sincerity, he confirmed with a deep voice. The young woman saw Han Li's doubt. After hesitating for a moment, she decided to speak the truth and dismiss the other party's doubts of the object's origin, else he dare not trade. This brush is an item handed down by my clan. It was used by some talisman creation expert. However, it is unfortunate that us two siblings do not have the slightest talent for creating talismans and would only squander this item in vain. In addition, my elder brother wishes to participate in this upcoming Great Immortal Ascension Assembly. His cultivation arts have already reached some sort of bottleneck and must break through with the support of medicinal power. As a result, I wish to use this object to exchange for your esteemed self's medicine pills. How is it that when I met you, the man's cultivation had reached a bottleneck? Isn't this too timely? Han Li thought with doubt. Actually, Han Li thought incorrectly. Of those in preparations for the Immortal Ascension Assembly's competition, 7 to 8 out of 10 were stuck at a bottleneck and were unable to break through. Because each and every person understood that they still had potential to push forward to another layer, they would not likely immediately participate in the Immortal Ascension Assembly's tournament, but rather hide away and continue painstakingly cultivating, hoping to reach a further layer. When they would participate in the next great assembly, they would break through and hold a higher position in the assembly. This caused every Immortal Ascension Assembly to have an amazing demand for medicine pills that progressed one magic power. Chapter 138 The Skill of Creating Talismans. Chapter 138 The Skill of Creating Talismans. Han Li was on the way back to the building, exceptionally happy with the wooden box containing the golden sincerity brush in his pocket. He used 3 bottles of golden dragon pellets and 4 bottles of golden essence pills to exchange for the young woman's treasured item and the bag of 7-star grass seeds. After, he casually bought some cinnabar sand from other vendor stalls and rushed back full of anticipation and joy. After he opened the restriction barrier and entered the small building, Han Li saw the small Buddhist monk meditating and did not disturb him. Instead, he went to the 2nd floor and returned to his room. After Han Li arranged the cinnabar and the talisman paper on the desk, Han Li took out the golden sincerity brush and became absorbed in creating soul-lock talismans. According to the soul-lock techniques method to create talismans, the steps were: channel spiritual power through right hand and slowly pour it into the brush shaft being held. Then lightly dip the brush tip into the cinnabar and draw the talisman incantation onto a slip of talisman paper. A quarter hour later, Han Li wore a happy expression on his face and stretched his somewhat stiff body. He looked at the spiritual talisman flickering a silver light on the table and could not help but feel elated. From its appearance, this spiritual talisman was exactly the same as the one used by Dr. Mo, although its spiritual chi was slightly weaker. It was of no matter as it was far better than the false goods Han Li practiced with. After all, those practice materials were only similar in appearance and didn't have the slightest spiritual power. Han Li took the newly created spiritual talisman and excitedly studied it. After he was done, he prepared to attempt the soul lock technique. Unexpectedly, though, before he executed the spell, the spiritual power on the paper talisman suddenly grew chaotic and showed signs of violence. Han Li was shocked and reacted instantly, hastily throwing the talisman away. Pache. The soul lock talisman suddenly combusted into the air without reason and turned into a ball of fire, reduced to a pile of ash. Han Li blankly looked into the air and remained silent. A while later he sighed. It seemed that talisman was a failure. Han Li felt somewhat dispirited, but he did not yet lose his confidence. After all, he felt that the talisman from a moment ago was quite close to being a success. He believed if he were to exert his strength and create several more, he was certain to have success. For the next half-day, Han Li manufactured soul-lock talismans one after another. However, he had continuously failed. The spiritual talismans he created did not combust by themselves, but instead suddenly turned into a small explosion when injected with his magic power. Furthermore, there were also spiritual talismans that would rapidly lose their spiritual power and become useless paper. When Han Li saw the last paper talisman he completed explode into shreds with a bang, the typically cool-minded Han Li could not help but raise his head to the roof and abruptly shout curses. "Damned heavens, you're playing with me. A dozen paper talismans, how could I not succeed a single time? This is only an elementary low-rank soul-lock talisman. Could it be that today was not a good day?" After these words left Han Li's mouth, he felt his depression had greatly lightened, and his mood became a bit happier. He tilted his head and pondered. Then he raised his eyebrow and looked at the remaining smaller half left in the small box of cinnabar and the golden sincerity brush. He felt that the cause was not from either of these because his spiritual power poured into the brush shaft very smoothly, and the cinnabar boldly imprinted the spiritual chi onto talisman paper. It didn't seem fake. Since Han Li could not find the reason after a moment of careful consideration, he decided to ask the small Buddhist monk and see whether or not he could dispel his doubts. At this moment, Han Li felt that on the path of cultivation, there would be teachers that could give directions. This was truly important. His heart was rather moved at the thought of formally becoming an apprentice to a master. After the small Buddhist monk heard Han Li's complaints over the failure of his talisman, he stared at Han Li with an exceptionally odd gaze, as if his face had suddenly sprouted a small white flower. When Han Li saw the Buddhist monk's reaction, his heart was somewhat startled. He didn't know if there was something amiss from the words he had just said, causing the other party to stare at him in this way. "Almsgiver Han Li, I fear you understand too little about creating talismans," the small Buddhist monk eventually said. "Master Ku Sang is correct. This is the first time I've created talismans," Han Li honestly admitted. "Among us cultivators, those of us who personally create talismans are few. If there is anything requiring the use of a talisman, they would generally purchase or exchange for it at a marketplace. Even if they are from a great clan, they must also do this." Why, Han Li was amazed. It's quite simple. Those masters experienced and specialized in creating talismans are too few. In addition, the cost to nurture a qualified talisman expert is far too great. Only with the strength of those large cultivation clans can they be nurtured. Almsgiver Han felt very vexed after having failed a dozen times in succession, right? The Buddhist monk asked. "That's right, I've used up my materials and money. I purchase enough to make several soul-lock talismans," Han Li said, upset. However, does Almsgiver know? For novices beginning to learn to create talismans, failing 100 times in succession is a normal matter. If a person were to have slightly less talent, to persist in having several hundred failures wouldn't be strange. Only after creating over 1,000 talismans would your rate of success possibly gradually increase. This is only with regards to creating a single type of spiritual talisman. If you were to change it to another kind of talisman, even if you are no longer a novice, you would generally fail at the beginning. Nevertheless, those with frightening talent are astonishing to see. As a result, qualified talisman masters cannot be nurtured without the practice of several tens of thousands attempts. However, how many people did Almsgiver Han Li think would succeed with this amount of material? Not cultivator clans, but only great cultivation sects can foster a talisman master. In addition, they would only be able to contribute elementary talismans. If they were to practice creating middle-grade talismans, those great sects would likely lose their fortunes. It would be an unbearable burden. After all, the higher grade the talisman, the more costly the talisman creation materials would be. The Buddhist monk said all of this, causing Han Li to be dumbstruck. Then why do vendor stalls still sell cinnabar and talisman paper? Han Li had second thoughts and felt something was wrong. Cinnabar and talisman paper are sold to cultivators who use talisman techniques, the small Buddhist monk said with a smile. Talisman techniques, Han Li did not understand. It is the same as soul lock technique your esteemed self was practicing. They are magic techniques that require the use of a talisman created in advance. The magic technique would be stored within the talisman paper, allowing the talismans to be used at convenience. A talisman technique's spiritual talismans are incapable of simply being aroused by spiritual power. They require a particular incantation to use. However, they generally aren't complicated and are quite easy to obtain. Because talisman techniques frequently require a corresponding talisman, talisman users feel that buying talismans are too expensive. As a result, they are like Almsgiver. They would go and practice drawing talismans. Although the cost of the materials are not small, they would be able to eventually support a single type. That is why if Almsgiver truly wishes to practice the soul lock technique, it would be best create one's own talismans in the long term. If this technique is not commonly used, then Almsgiver may as well spend some money to buy a few soul-lock talismans as reserves. The small Buddhist monk softly preached, eventually giving Han Li a suggestion. "Thank you for Master Ku Sang's pointers." Han Li sincerely gave him a deep salute. "Almsgiver is too polite," Buddhist monk returned the salute. This small Buddhist monk actually speaks much. In the future, if there is anything hard to understand, I may as well ask him for guidance. Han Li thought to himself as he returned to the room. Currently, closed-door talisman creation practice is impossible. I should find some time to buy a few soul-lock talismans for emergency use. My body has long achieved the peak of 8th layer of the Eternal Spring Arts. Now that I've acquired the cultivation method for the last layers, I should be able to break through the bottleneck and enter the 9th layer. In addition, I acquired several new magic techniques to practice. I should wield them a bit sooner and increase my strength. The moment Han Li pushed open the room door, he had already finished pondering about his future plans. Like that, Han Li sat in room in the coming days. During the daytime, he would take a great amount of medicine and sit in meditation, refining qi and cultivating the eternal spring arts. At night, he would run into a desolate area in the valley and practice his newly learned magic techniques. These were quicksand technique, freezing technique, flight technique, binding technique, sound transmission technique, body concealment technique, fire blossom technique, and the most difficult to practice, earth thrust technique. After 10 days of painstaking cultivation, on the final day of the Great South Meeting, he broke through to the 9th layer of Eternal Spring Arts, causing Wu Jiaji and company to be dumbstruck. Taoist priest Qing when even praised Han Li as a genius amongst rogue cultivators. However, Han Li was well aware that were it not for the 10 bottles of medicine pills he consumed, how else could he have easily overcome the bottleneck? However, he no longer carried many medicine pills on him. It seemed he should take the time to concoct some pills once more. Chapter 139, Destroyed Magic Treasure Fragment. Chapter 139, Destroyed Magic Treasure Fragment. As for the other magic techniques, the body concealment technique and sound transmission technique were auxiliary magic techniques similar to that of the Heaven's Eye technique. So long as one somewhat comprehended magic power, they were able to learn it. As a result, Han Li effortlessly mastered them. Among these, the sound transmission technique was a talisman technique that required a sound transmission talisman, which Han Li had seen being used several times. The body concealment technique was an extremely common magic technique. By attaching spiritual power to one's body, the body becomes enveloped in the environment's colors, causing people to have difficulty perceiving the user. This magic technique, however, holds little value because the Heaven's Eye technique can easily break through it. It fundamentally could not be used to escape the notice of other cultivators. The quicksand technique and freezing technique were magic techniques with areas of effect. The first used magic power to turn the earth in an area into sand. The other could freeze the water in an area into ice. The might of these two magic techniques depended entirely on the deepness of the magic power used and intention. If a deity were to put it to use, turning a 1,000 li of fertile land into desert and the Changjiang River into a glacier would not be impossible. The reason as to why they were classified as elementary low-grade magic techniques was only because these two magic techniques were quite easily learned. Even qi condensation cultivators with few layers were able to easily master them. However, their magic power would be limited, and their range would be pathetically small. When Han Li originally practiced these two magic techniques, they were quite power-intensive. However, when he suddenly broke through to the 9th layer, his magic power rapidly increased, allowing him to use his magic techniques as he wished. He could already control an area the size of a tabletop and could turn it to sand or freeze it as he pleased, causing Han Li to be greatly excited. As for the remaining magic techniques, Han Li was unable to grasp them at the moment. He could only helplessly deliberate and study them later in the future. Because the Great South Meeting was about to end, the amount of young cultivators that came to do business would reach its peak in its last 2 days. At this moment, Han Li was in the large business plaza that was crowded to the brim with 2,000 cultivators. The amount of vendor stalls were also several times greater than before. For the most part, they wished to grab onto this final opportunity and peddle their leftover goods. In addition, an unknown amount of higher-level cultivators that emerged from long cultivation began to appear one after another, also wanting to take advantage of this opportunity to observe those who could become formidable opponents. Han Li bitterly smiled. Although he had already entered the 9th layer, while he was walking amongst the crowd of cultivators, he discovered many people that were above the 9th layer. Currently, Han Li no longer had any spirit stones, and his medicine pills were few in number. Since he had no intention of getting rid of his treasures, he simply followed the stream of people from vendor stall to vendor stall. He went simply to hear other cultivators' comments and views on the trades of goods to further his experience and knowledge. Hearing others speak truly broadened Han Li's horizons, causing him to understand quite a bit about magic tools and materials. For example, magic darts that automatically pursued enemies, gourds that could shoot flames, long sabers capable of freezing people with a cut, silver-winged ant eggs that could be used to create medicine, scales of a 100-year-old iron-lined serpents that could be used to craft tools, and so on. The more Han Li heard, the more he felt fascinated. Han Li had arrived at the center of the plaza before he knew it. "This won't do. I don't want what you're offering. Give me something else in exchange." "This is a destroyed magic treasure fragment. It is more than enough for your alms bowl." "What use would I have for this ruined fragment? Could it be that you couldn't find a core formation expert to refine it? Don't think you can exchange it with my returning wind's alms bowl. The sound of an intense quarrel arrived from the front of a vendor's stall. Destroyed magic treasure fragment. Many people let out sounds of surprise, immediately causing nearby cultivators to stir a commotion. After a moment of chaos, the vendor's stall was surrounded by an impenetrable crowd. It should be known that magic treasures weren't something that low-level cultivators would even dare to dream about. However, one had unexpectedly appeared in the Great South Valley. Even if it were only a ruined fragment, it was still a marvel, causing these cultivators to become like cats smelling fish. The itch in their hearts was hardly tolerable. Where is it? Let me see. Is this the magic treasure? Click's tongue, it's truly beautiful. That's just a rag. Because Han Li was quite close to that vendor's stall and was already quite faster than common cultivators, he managed to rush in the crowd and obtain a good position, allowing him to clearly see everything. Looking at the vendor stall, Han Li saw a 27 to 28-year-old man standing in front of the stall. This man had dark skin and thick limbs. At first glance, one would think a farm peasant had snuck into the Great South Valley. However, those who looked at the man's magic power with the Heaven's Eye technique could not help but let out a breath of shock. This dark-skinned man was actually a great expert of the 10th layer. Competing against this person, isn't that courting death? A few cultivators inwardly weighed with surprise. They then brought their gaze toward the vendor stall's owner. The vendor seemed to be a common black-clothed man with the appearance of having magic power of only the 7th or 8th layer. However, when he confronted the man before him, his face didn't have the slightest expression of fear. There were a few that took notice of the embroidered tree leaf design on the vendor's collar. Only then did the cultivators realize that this person was a disciple of the well-known Yi clan of the Qin Yi mountain range. It was no wonder he held such confidence. Between these two people on the stall was an oddly patterned yellow alms bowl and a small piece of translucent cloth. This item was like a rag, wrinkled with its rim ruined unevenly as if a dog had gnawed on it. The only aspect attracting attention was the twinkling white radiance that appeared occasionally. It was somewhat peculiar. This was the destroyed magic treasure fragment. After seeing this object, many people in the crowd were greatly disappointed. It was greatly inconsistent with what they imagined within their minds. This ruined magic treasure is quite wonderful. By using it to cover an item, it will immediately become invisible. Not only will its spiritual chi not leak out, but it also won't obstruct spiritual chi from entering. The dark man had a cold face. After this was said, he immediately took out small silver mouse from his sleeve. The grade 1 demon beast, gold-eating mouse. The cultivators standing in a circle yelled out the name of the rat and caused a small uproar. He is truly worthy of being a 10th layer expert. He actually captured a grade 1 demonic beast. Many people could not help but think this. At this moment, the dark man picked up the cloth and wrapped it around the mouse. The result was miraculous. The silver mouse and the cloth immediately disappeared. Although many people used the Heaven's Eye technique, they weren't able to see anything. The man, having seen everyone's shock, was somewhat satisfied. Afterwards, the hand that held the white mouse wrapped in the cloth suddenly showed movement. Not just living animal, non-living items will also have the same effect. After this was said, the man took out a knife emitting a threatening spiritual chi and put it on the ground. Then he covered it in the cloth, causing it to disappear without a trace or even the slightest trace of spiritual chi. It is truly wonderful. It can make things invisible. Click's tongue, inconceivable. Those who were watching around were discussing spiritedly. How about it? There is value in exchange it with your alms bowl. The man then took off the cloth and put away the knife. I will not exchange it. If I want something to be invisible, I only need to buy an elementary mid-grade vanishing talisman. For such a small thing, you would have me hide my head and legs. The vendor shook his head and said mockingly. Did I not tell you? This is a destroyed magic treasure fragment. It wasn't refined by a core formation expert but that of nascent soul. Those experts, levels are not the same, who would be able to see through the efficacy of its concealment. How could a vanishing talisman compare to it? The dark man angrily said. You spout extravagant descriptions once more. I absolutely have no use for this thing. Why would I want it? You had better give me 30 spirit stones or something of equivalent value for this alms bowl, the vendor coldly retorted. Chapter 140 Determination to Win. Chapter 140 Determination to Win. The man seemed to be extremely angry. His two hands formed fists, and he advanced a step. "What? Could it be that you're thinking of forcing the trade? Those of our Yi clan aren't good targets to bully." The vendor turned his eyes and said without a trace of politeness, "Humph, the Yi clan is quite impressive." Although the dark man did not apologize, he released his fists. He was clearly afraid of retaliation from the Yi clan. The man was suppressed by the mere mention of the Yi clan and was exceptionally angry. He was a 10th layer expert and was accustomed to others speaking highly of him. Currently, he had accepted this embarrassment and had planned to brush his sleeve then ago. However, in his heart, he would truly hate to part with this returning Wind's alms bowl, as this magic tool was well suited with his cultivation art. If he were able to acquire it, his strength would increase greatly. However, as of current, apart from the destroyed magic treasure fragment, his other possessions were quite useful, and his spirit stones had been used up over the past several days, leaving him in his current predicament. "Brother, sell your treasure fragment to me. I will give 10 spirit stones." A gray-clothed man that was watching emerged from the crowd. He sincerely said, cupping his fist in front of the man, "I won't sell it. If you want to buy it, then give me 30 spirit stones." The dark man shook his head as if he were beating a drum with it. That price was fundamentally unacceptable. "Sai, your esteemed self's destroyed magic treasure fragment, if it were only a slightly great price, then it would be worth it. Unfortunately, it is truly too small. The amount of goods it can conceal is too few." The gray-clothed man, having been rejected by the man, exposed an expression of regret and returned into the crowd without further negotiation. "Would you sell it for 12 spirit stones?" 13. The cultivators from all directions were looking at the destroyed magic treasure fragment with great interest. Even if they couldn't use this item, they could slowly study it. Who knows what they would be able to achieve enlightenment in. Like that, the price rose to 20 after a moment, bidded by a naive-looking, round-faced youth. In face of such a high price, others no longer spoke out. They all felt this price was quite high. If there were to grow any higher, it would be far too damaging. After all, to these low-level cultivators, having 10 spirit stones would be regarded as quite well off. In addition, the man from a moment ago was most likely the disciple of a clan. Only they could possibly be that rich. 20, the dark man's expression changed. The bid had reached his minimum. If he were to pair it with a few other objects, he would be able to exchange with the vendor for the returning Wind alms bowl. "You want to pay 20 spirit stones," the man amiably said toward the round-faced youth. Although nobody knew why, after a moment the youth's face was red. Then after another moment his face turned white, and he became extremely frantic. "I don't have that many spirit stones." After the round-faced youth stammered these words with frustration and unease, the surrounding spectators were shocked. "You do? Why did you just yell that? Could it be you said it to deliberately amuse me?" When the dark man heard this, the man's belly full of anger erupted out from his body, rigidly pressing down onto the youth with formidable grandeur. "I simply saw everyone shouting out prices for fun. Without thinking, I also opened my mouth. Brother, please forgive me." The round-faced youth hastily apologized to absolve himself. His brow was beaded with sweat, and soybean-sized sweat drops tumbled down. He was merely a 5th layer cultivator. How could he resist such spiritual pressure? Who just shouted 19. "I'm willing to freely give a spirit stone to allow your esteemed self to purchase this item." The youth resourcefully yelled at once. Unfortunately, those all around were extremely quiet. It seemed that person had already changed their mind. How about the brother who shouted 18? When the youth saw the dark man's increasingly scornful face, he nearly wept. He was an insignificant young cultivator. He only had 2 spirit stones on him, acquired from a year of bitter labor. Just as the people thought they were about to see quite a good show, wait a moment. A relaxed voice suddenly sounded out. A person entered the stage, calling out to the dark man. "What do you want?" The black man looked at the person with a gloomy face. His temper had already been ground to dust. If this person wanted to have a feud, he wouldn't mind taking them both out. Although this person was not weak, he was only of the 9th layer. This person has taken an interest in this item and desires it. That individual pointed at that cloth and said with a smile. The one the dark man had mistaken to be a cultivator looking for a fight was not a bystander, but Han Li. Originally, when Han Li heard this person say that this destroyed magic treasure fragment could turn things invisible and conceal spiritual chi, his heart was stirred, and his mind formed a vague opinion. By the time the dark man had concealed the knife, Han Li's opinion in his mind grew clear. He became determined to possess this destroyed treasure fragment. How much will you purchase for it? The dark man was surprised, but a moment later, his expression eased as he asked this question. This person does not plan to purchase it, but rather use this object to exchange for it. Han Li calmly took out a talisman from his sleeve, allowing those surrounding the stall to clearly see it. A flight talisman, a few knowledgeable people cried out in alarm. It's an elementary, high-grade spiritual talisman. The other cultivators were awed. After all, elementary high-grade talismans had only appeared 5 or 6 times since the beginning of this Great South meeting. In addition, each and every one of them had been sold at astonishing prices. Chapter 140, One Writ of Immortal Ascension. Chapter 141, Writ of Immortal Ascension. With a look at this flight talisman, the dark man and the vendor stall owner were visibly moved. Their view of Han Li grew much more serious. After all, those possessing elementary high-grade talismans were unlikely to be a nobody. Good, I will exchange. The dark man was very straightforward. With such an obviously advantageous trade, who wouldn't trade? However, before we trade, I wish to try something you have said before, whether or not this treasure fragment will obstruct a concealed object from absorbing the spiritual chi from the outside world. If it is true, this person will immediately trade for it. If it is not true, this person will not take the loss and trade. When the dark man heard Han Li's words, he was surprised. However, after clearly hearing the content of his words, he smiled. The words I have spoke regarding this object's effects are all true. Please do not hesitate to test it, the dark man confidently spoke. When Han Li heard this, he was not polite. He took out an object resembling a wine cup from his body. He then picked up the cloth and covered it. Waiting until after the wine cup disappeared, Han Li extended his finger and condensed a white ball of spiritual chi the size of a bean. He lightly dropped it on the cloth, resulting in the ball of light completely disappearing, as if it were swallowed. When Han Li saw this, his face showed a happy expression. He lightly grabbed the cloth in his hand and removed it. The wine cup appeared, and ball of light that disappeared a moment ago was flowing inside. Not bad, brother did not speak falsely. I want this destroyed magic treasure fragment. As for this flight talisman, it belongs to your esteemed self. Han Li took the cloth and put it in his cuff. Afterwards, he cupped his fist toward the dark man. Good, your esteemed self is straightforward. When the dark man heard this, he was exalted and lowered his body to take the flight talisman. After he hastily looked all over it to confirm it wasn't fake, he smiled. Han Li faintly smiled and did not say anything further. He turned around and squeezed through the crowd. However, before he even took a few steps, he heard several comments from the crowd. This man is foolish, to actually trade a high-grade talisman for such a weak item. That's right, that fragment is so small, what use does it have? To exchange for such a thing is fundamentally not worth it. Don't say it like that, maybe he has a clever use for it. When Han Li heard this, he inwardly sneered several times. How could these cultivators know that this object is of immense importance to me? This brother, please wait for me. Having not walked very far, Han Li heard a voice from behind him, approaching him in a hurry. Han Li was slightly surprised. Could they be yelling him? He could not help but turn his head. He saw a person not too far away, running towards him with a forehead beaded with sweat while calling out to him. It was unexpectedly the round-faced youth who had nearly brought disaster upon himself. Han Li blinked a few times and then stopped. He curiously wanted to know what business this buffoon would have with him to have pursued him at the very end. Brother, I've finally caught up to you, the youth chasing him said while gasping for breath. Does this brother have something on his mind? Han Li looked at him with doubt. This is for you. It could be considered thanks for elder brother's help out of the troublesome situation. Without saying anything further, the youth handed Han Li a booklet. Then he bashfully ran back. Han Li was slightly surprised, but he immediately smiled. There was such a simple and honest person among the cultivators. This was truly unexpected. He did not pursue him, and instead he took a look at the book in his hand. Record of Qingzai was the book's title. It didn't seem to be a magic item. Han Li looked through a few pages with interest. TL Qingzai means Young Creek. It seemed to be the journal of a senior cultivator, Taoist Master Qingzai, of the state of Yue, who did not like cultivating, but instead enjoyed traveling to different places. It contained elusive legends and such with detailed notes. There were also some pages with relevant, vivid, and lifelike drawings. Although Han Li only looked through a few pages, he held quite an interest in this item and put the booklet into his bosom. After that, Han Li didn't come across any particular affairs. He felt a bit bored and returned to his residence. Inside his room, Han Li lied down on his bed and looked through the record of Qingzai. Of the contents in the book, a few were Master Qingzai's personal experiences and others were merely gossip. However, not one of them wasn't bizarre. There were rarely heard unusual matters and secrets that cultivator clans would never tell others. It was unknown how Master Qingzai had learned of them. Han Li read with great interest. However, when he reached the final page of the booklet, there were the drawings of 7 distinct command medallions. At the very bottom of the drawings were several lines of words. Writ of Immortal Ascension, created by the 7 great cultivator sects of the state of Yue. It was the each cultivator sect's award for accomplishing tremendous achievements within a cultivator sect. So long as one holds the cultivator's sect command medallion, they would receive the same treatment as the final victor of the Immortal Ascension Assembly. It would bestow the qualifications to become an inner court disciple and receive foundation establishment pills. However, this object had always been handed down within the sect. Common cultivators would have no chance of seeing them. As a result, these portrayals were simply according to their appearances from rumors. At the end, Master Qingzai used somewhat smaller characters to write these words. This writ can be traded between cultivator clans. The age when writs were first issued was a time long ago. As a result, the cultivator clans that issued writs recognized the writs but not the people. So long as someone holds a writ, they would take a step toward the heavens. It could be said to be a low-level cultivator's defiance of the natural order. After Han Li finished reading the explanation below, he took another look at the 7 illustrations and felt his tongue dry up. His heart beated with intensity. Originally, when Han Li heard the words Great Immortal Ascension Assembly, he faintly made an association with the dwarf's strange command medallion. One side of the command medallion had 2 words engraved, Immortal Ascension. This made Han Li feel as if these 2 things had something in common. After he heard the others talk about the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly in detail, there were no words relating to the writ of Immortal Ascension. He believed this to be no more than a coincidence and left it in the back of his mind. However, he didn't expect the booklet he unexpectedly received to have the object's origin and true use. In addition, the function of this writ of Immortal Ascension was this great. Han Li grew more and more excited, hastily taking out the black command medallion. After briefly comparing it with the illustration, he found it to be greatly similar to its design. Yellow Maple Valley. This writ of Immortal Ascension was issued by the Yellow Maple Valley. Han Li muttered to himself as he stroked the command medallion in his hand. However, how did this precious item enter the hands of a lowly cultivator like Monk Golden Light? Han Li doubtedly thought after calming down. In fact, that dwarf was truly the previous owner of that command medallion. It turned out that in the outstanding and famous Qinyi mountain range, apart from the Yi clan, there was also another equivalent clan that resided there, the Qin clan. Because those 2 clans had many intermarried relationships, they got along quite well. This writ of Immortal Ascension was an object passed down from the ancestors of the Qin clan. However, they did not use it because the Qin clan could no longer find a genius cultivator who deserved the writ. That was why they would rather continue to pass it down and were unwilling to waste this treasure for no reason. However, after many generations, because the males of the Qin clan grew more sparse, they gradually declined. In contrast, the Yi clan grew even more prosperous and developed. They influenced the cultivation world so much that everyone knew that the Qinyi mountain housed the Yi clan, while the Qin clan became forgotten. During Monk Golden Light's generation, he was actually the sole remaining male from the Qin clan, and his aptitude was strange and lacking. He fundamentally could not possibly achieve foundation establishment. Because of his aptitude, the large difference in strength between the 2 clans, and the fact that their relationship as in-laws was a matter long expired, the Yi clan decided to acquire the several treasures of the Qin clan. In addition, that writ of Immortal Ascension was the treasure they wanted to possess to most. Although Monk Golden Light's cultivation talent was lacking, his ability to read body language was actually quite good. With the fact that he was also cowardly, just as the Yi clan had planned to make a move, the dwarf, having caught wind of this earlier, had already fled, taking a small sword talisman and the writ of Immortal Ascension. As for the other treasures, because they were sealed away, Monk Golden Light could not acquire them in a short amount of time, and was forced to reluctantly abandon them, setting them aside for the Yi clan. As a result, Monk Golden Light had been on the run for over 10 years, and lived in seclusion in some Taoist temple deep within the wilderness. He relied on his shallow magic power to plunder drink and food and became free and unfettered. After a period of time, he had thought to use the writ of immortal ascension, but that notion had gradually weakened. He reached the conclusion even if he were to take the Foundation Establishment pill, he would not be able to achieve Foundation Establishment. Since that was the case, there was no need to go to a large cultivator sect as a low-level disciple and suffer hardship. Like that, after the assault on the Seven Mysteries Sect, Han Li had conveniently acquired this writ of immortal ascension. Chapter 142, Attack to Kill. Han Li was completely ignorant of the Qin clan's situation. However, this did not obstruct his ecstatic mood. While he excitedly walked around the room, he incessantly fiddled with writ of immortal ascension in his hand. In addition, the more he looked at this command medallion, the more pleasing to the eye it became. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Han Li calmed down the excitement in his heart. He began to think of his plans for the future and the feasibility of traveling to Yellow Maple Valley to formally become an apprentice to a master. After a night of restless, difficult sleep for Han Li, the Great South Small meeting had at last come to an end. From the beginning of the morning of the second day, many cultivators had already begun to leave the valley. The people inside the valley had already been reduced to less than half. During the afternoon, there were several slightly older senior experts who appeared in the plaza. After they said a few encouraging words of praise, they declared the formal termination of the Great South meeting. That Taoist Master Qingyan was also one of those experts. Suddenly, in groups of 3 or 4 or perhaps like wild geese, the remaining cultivators flew into the sky and floated there. At this moment, Taoist priest Qing Wen and the other went to find Han Li, inviting him to journey with them once more. After a moment of silence, Han Li declined their invitation, greatly angering Wu Jiazhi and the Mo brothers. Even Taoist priest Qing Wen's complexion was somewhat unsightly. Since Brother Han is unwilling to travel with us, Qing Wen will not force you. Take care of yourself on your journey, brother. After a sigh from Qing Wen, he said this with a regretful tone. He then patted Han Li's shoulders and departed the valley with the others. Han Li hadn't discovered that during the second that Taoist priest Qing Wen patted Han Li's shoulders, a bit of colorless and formless fine powder left Qing Wen's cuff and scattered on Han Li's clothes. In addition, the area sprinkled with dust was slightly unusual, but nothing could be seen. When Wu Jiazhi and company left the thick fog of the valley, Taoist priest Qing Wen had fallen behind them at an unknown time and took advantage of the thoughtlessness of the several people while exposing a sinister appearance. He suddenly raised his cuff and sent a stream of flame toward the sky. It disappeared into the shrubbery at the side. His face then resumed his normal, rightful, and strict appearance, as if the actions from a moment ago had not occurred. Han Li did not completely understand what Taoist priest Qing Wen just did, but due to his continuous habit of being cautious, he didn't immediately set off from the Great South Valley, but rather waited the night inside the valley. When it was early morning with the dew shining brightly, he stealthily slipped away from the valley in a manner that even gods and ghosts could not see. TL, gods don't know and ghosts don't see. After he left the Great South Valley, Han Li identified the direction. He used the Imperial flight technique and lightly tapped his foot against the ground, propelling him about 10 meters away. Like that, his clothes fluttered into the distance. Not long after he departed the valley, 2 people hurriedly rushed over. In front of them was a green ball of light the size of a thumb guiding their way. After they turned to where Han Li was just a moment ago, they followed in the direction that Han Li flew off to. Those 2 people precisely followed the green light's directions. Han Li did not yet stop on the journey, not even resting after having traveled over 100 li. When he arrived at a small hill, he stopped to sit down and eat a few things, recovering his exhausted body and magic power as well. Han Li did not know that his actions, having not followed common conventions, caused the 2 pursuing behind him to curse endlessly. This was not surprising. They had set out on their pursuit before the light of day. Had they not marked Han Li's body, they would have probably lost him. However, their original plan to set a trap ahead of him and ambush him had fallen through. What made the 2 even more incomparably angry was that Han Li's leaps and steps and traversed more than 100 li, causing the 2 to eat a bellyful of dust. They were so tired they could drop. After all, these 2 had been cultivators for a long time and were accustomed to living like princes. Having to bitterly rely on their legs to travel a long distance, these 2 had not experienced this in quite a long time. It was not known how much time had passed since Han Li had sat down cross-legged inside a depression of the hill and shut his eyes, motionless. It appeared he entered a state of selflessness. Apart from the sounds of the hill's wildlife around him, he heard no other noise. It was at this time that somewhere from the nearby earth, the ground broke and emitted several tens of streams of white light directly toward Han Li. The originally motionless Han Li suddenly opened his eyes and saw the cold light. His body suddenly soared into the air without reason, and he lightly landed with both feet on an open space to the side. Poo-poo, those white lights naturally missed their target. The true identity of the sparkling and half-transparent white lights that had attempted to strike Han Li during meditation was more than 10 incomparably sharp ice alls. When Han Li saw this, his expression became gloomy. He stretched out his right hand and extended his 5 fingers, Zalala. After a burst of explosive sounds, 5 small fireballs appeared at his fingertips. These fireballs, compared to the fireballs of the common fireball technique, were smaller by more than half. Your esteemed self should taste this person's fireballs, Han Li shouted awe-inspiringly while gazing at the place where the ice alls flew from. Then he slightly bent his fingers and suddenly shot them. The 5 fireballs flew out in a line. As soon as the fireballs were about to touch the floor, the image of yellow-clothed man suddenly appeared. Then the man flashed, and his image appeared elsewhere. He happened to avoid the fireball attack. Bang! The small area where Han Li's fireballs exploded left a few large holes that released a blistering hot air. A few of the places exposed signs of melting from high temperature, causing the man who had dangerously escaped death to break out a cold sweat. At this time, Han Li did not pay attention to the holes but rather firmly stared at the yellow-clothed man who jumped out. He was a slender, 30-year-old man with a cunning face. "Why did you ambush me?" Han Li coldly asked. When the yellow-clothed man heard this, he rolled his eyes. He sinisterly laughed several times and said, "You will know in your next life." Soon after, he suddenly yelled with a cold voice, "Go!" Han Li was shocked. Just as he was about to move, he heard 2 slight sounds of ground breaking beneath him. Then, 2 large hands twinkling with a yellow radiance emerged from the ground like lightning and firmly grabbed Han Li's legs. It was as if he were immediately bound with steel chains, causing Han Li to be unable to move a single step. "Brat, your death is certain. Your legs can't move. Let's see how you will dodge my icicle technique," the yellow-clothed man proudly said with an evil smile. He raised his 2 hands toward Han Li and began to mutter to himself. As a result, the threatening cold air in front of his hands gradually condensed into white crystals, eventually taking the form of sharp ice alls. Han Li's complexion greatly changed. His hand pressed against his waist. The tinkling of small bells rang and a cold light flashed. He took out a shining long sword, and without hesitation he chopped down. Clang! It was as if the sword had struck rock and emitted sparks. In addition, those yellow large hands were unscathed. Han Li was alarmed and angry. When he thought to make another attempt, the yellow-clothed man across from him wildly laughed. "Ha-ha, die, brat." Han Li's heart sunk, and he immediately raised his head. He saw 20 sharp ice alls fiercely shooting toward his entire body, without giving him a method to dodge. When Han Li saw this, his expression became incomparably grave. He took a deep breath and bit down on his teeth. Without moving, his body strangely twisted left and right. Most of the ice alls were unexpectedly dodged by his movements. Only his right shoulder and left leg were incapable of evading and were pierced through with the ice alls. In an instant, blood flowed from the wounds and leaked through his clothes. Han Li threw away the long sword in his hand. With his 10 fingers, he sealed the blood vessels near his wounds at a lightning-fast speed, causing the bleeding to suddenly stop. Then the originally complacent yellow-clothed man widely opened his eyes, not believing what he had just seen. Han Li's expression grew dark. He used the strength in his 2 calves and unexpectedly twisted them as if they had no bone. After a burst of popping sounds from the legs, he suddenly shrank his body into a ball while he was still alive, and his whole body suddenly fled upward. His legs were like a slippery fish, slipping out from the stiff grasp of those 2 large hands. He then shot into the air and landed more than 30 meters away, coldly staring at the large hands. "Impossible! How did his legs slip out from the grasp of my tremendous strength technique?" From the earth below, the hand spoke a muffled, angry, and alarmed voice. Then the 2 hands stiffly emerged out from the earth, revealing a burly silhouette covered in a bold yellow light. Chapter 143, Beheading. The large man that had just emerged from the ground, and the yellow-clothed man started to chase after Han Li. As they chased him, they were afraid that Han Li would run far away again. After recovering a bit of magic power, they immediately grouped up and planned their next attack. At this time, Han Li felt a scorching pain from his wounded thigh. It seemed that his movements from a moment ago had worsened his injury. However, now was not the time to think about that problem. The large man that had concealed himself in the ground a moment ago took out a long saber covered in black chi and fiercely charged toward Han Li. When Han Li saw his opponent's figures, he observed that although they were quite fast, their movements were stiff. It was clear these people only relied on the support of magic techniques. His heart could not help but slightly relax. It should be known that Han Li's strange and quick movements would prevent them from catching up to him. With that thought, Han Li no longer paid attention to the large, overbearing man and placed his attention onto the yellow-clothed man instead, as the man had taken out a dark green gourd. He had pointed the mouth of the gourd toward Han Li, seemingly wanting to cast a magic technique. "Where do you think you're looking, Dai?" The large man charged next to Han Li with a greatly flourished yellow light on his body. He lifted his demonic long saber and chopped it down toward Han Li. Han Li snorted. His body flashed, appearing outside the reach of the saber. "You were fooled, boy," the large man wildly laughed. A black light from the long saber in his hand flashed and turned into a long black rope. Like a long snake, it closely followed and twisted toward Han Li, neither locking him down nor letting him go. Han Li was startled, and his body immediately grew strangely indistinct. One moment he was at the left, then right, then front, then back, as if there were several Han Lis encircling the large man. When the large man saw this, he grew greatly intimidated. However, he immediately protected his body with the earth armor technique, and no longer paid any attention to Han Li's afterimages. Instead, he hastily moved his flexible black rope and did his utmost to pursue Han Li's true body. Ping ping, ping ping. Han Li swept past the side of the large man. During that instant he fiercely shot fireballs at the large man with both hands around him. As they hit his body, the yellow light shook for a moment. Unfortunately, it recovered at once. How could this meager fireball technique break through this uncle's defensive technique? The large man's face was savage, and the movement of his hands grew even more rapid. The movements of the black rope didn't relax even the slightest. Han Li felt somewhat anxious. Although the large man's black rope was somewhat slower than him, he was unable to cope with it. He dared not slow down his body's movements, else he was certain to be caught. Although he didn't know what sort of magic tool the black rope was, it was quite troublesome. However, he didn't dare to negligently let it wrap around him. He busily glanced toward the yellow-clothed man and saw that his expression was solemn. The magic tool gourd in his hand started to release a secretive azure light. It was unknown what would about to emerge from within. "This won't do. If this continues, I won't be able to survive. If I don't brave a few risks, I will die," Han Li thought to himself, having seen the desperate circumstances. As a result, Han Li rushed to take out the guardian talisman he received from monk Golden Light. This guardian talisman was a type of talisman technique. Its incantation had long been acquired from Buddhist monk Ku Sang. Now he had finally used it. Han Li softly chanted the incantation verses. Because he was in the middle of moving, it sounded somewhat ambiguous. However, the talisman's golden characters started to brighten. When the golden characters were completely shining, Han Li suddenly slapped the talisman onto his body. A golden light suddenly appeared and covered his body with a golden barrier. However, his body suddenly became slower, and the black chain overtook him and wrapped around him. The usage of a guardian talisman caused one's movements to slow. Han Li had already tested this and was well aware. Although the black rope wound around him several times when it was obstructed by the golden light, he did not panic. He knew that his gamble was correct as the golden barrier protected him against the magic tool's assault. When the large man saw this, he let out a low roar. He charged forward with large strides, with obnoxious, dazzling yellow light on his fists. They seemed to be supported by an unknown cultivation technique. Having learned a lesson from last time, Han Li did not let the large man get close. He suddenly crouched and pressed both hands against the floor. Then he muttered an incantation, suddenly causing his hands be slightly enveloped in a yellow light. When the large man saw this, he was slightly startled and hastily stopped. However, it was already too late. The floor below him completely turned into soft and weak quicksand, causing his legs to be deeply buried to his thighs and to become flustered. "Strike!" A sharp voice entered Han Li's ear. Han Li's heart sunk as he looked toward the yellow-clothed man. With only a single look, Han Li saw 7 to 8 black spheres the size of chicken eggs emerge from the mouth of the black gourd and rush toward him. Han Li's face grew very unsightly, and the yellow light in his hand scattered. He then took out a wooden box from his bosom. At this time, the several spheres were already in front of him, and ruthless pounded against Han Li's barrier. The barrier was incessantly deformed, as if it could break at any moment. Han Li didn't take notice of this crisis and sat down cross-legged, putting the wooden box on his knee. He then rushed an incantation. Peng peng, peng peng, peng peng. The sphere's attacks were fierce and didn't cease attacking the golden barrier for even a moment, causing the golden light to gradually dim. It seemed the barrier would break and that death would approach. At this time Han Li shouted with a roar, "Rise!" With this order, a gray light about 3 meters long shot forth from within the wooden box. This ray of light resembled a flood dragon that had emerged from the water. It flew several circles in all directions, and hacked all of the spheres into two one after another as if they were its nemesis, turning them to dust. "Treasure talisman," the yellow-clothed man loudly shouted as if he had seen a ghost. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred. However, he did not think of it further as the large man had already escaped from the trap. However, after seeing Han Li's gray sword light, his complexion grew deathly white. Not only did he not think to rush toward Han Li, but he also turned around and wildly fled. Thought at this time, Han Li was already resolved to kill. How could he let these people leave? He pointed to the large person, and the sword light immediately and fiercely pursued, appearing behind the large man's body. It coiled around the large man's neck, and his skull easily tumbled to the ground. It was as if the yellow light protecting his body didn't exist, not affecting it in the slightest. When the yellow-clothed man saw this, he had actually dared to stay there for the moment. He took out a talisman and slapped it onto his body, causing him to spout out a pair of large yellow wings. He lightly flapped them and soared off, flying to a distant place. Han Li then commanded the sword light to pursue, closely following behind the yellow-clothed man. The yellow-clothed man flew even faster, and the gray light was unexpectedly unable to overtake him for a time. Han Li felt slightly anxious, and his heart grew fierce. He then used all of the magic power he had without reserve. It was as if that gray streak had immediately consumed a tonic and suddenly sped up, piercing through the chest of the yellow-clothed man and thoroughly bringing peace to Han Li's heart. The yellow-clothed man screamed and fell from the air. Han Li grew greatly cheerful and recalled the gray light. He dashed toward the man, hoping to capture him alive and carefully interrogate him. Unfortunately, when Han Li arrived at the crash site, the yellow-clothed man couldn't possibly be any more dead. He simply fell to his death, causing Han Li to be quite depressed. Since there were no living mouths, he could only search the two bodies and see whether he could find any useful clues. After Han Li impolitely plundered all the items on the two men's bodies, he did not find any relevant items. Even so, he struck it rich. These two men actually had 50 low-grade spirit stones as well as a few talismans and magic tools. Han Li could not make head or tails of their assault and was somewhat puzzled. He also did not know whether or not these two had anything to do with the missing rogue cultivators. However, he didn't dare to stay here too long. After consuming a few medicine pills, he continued on his way. Chapter 144, Dispute over a Foundation Establishment Pill. Chapter 144, Dispute over a Foundation Establishment Pill. The Jian province located in the north of the state of Yue was ranked second amongst the 13 provinces. Its land is comprised of many hills, and its population is sparse. It also bordered the state of Yuanwu. The Tai-Yue mountain range was located at the western part of the province and spanned over several thousands of li. In addition, all sorts of beasts and birds of prey existed in great numbers within the desolate mountain forest. On occasion, even woodcutters and hunters would start rumors of having seen immortals and monsters, further shrouding the location in mystery. Naturally, no common man would have thought that for several thousand years, the center of this mountain range had been the home of one of the 7 great cultivator sects, the Yellow Maple Valley. From the view above, it appeared no different from other mountain ranges. The ridges were steep and the forest was lush. However, it was completely an illusion as it was actually covered in a wondrously large, sect-wide formation. Underneath the formation were countless towers and grand halls that had been built long ago. There were even cultivators busily about, flying at low altitudes on top of leaf-shaped petal magic tools. Yellow Maple Valley's current sect master Zhang Lingdao was already 100 years old. However, he still had the middle-aged appearance of having 3 long strands of facial hair, comprising of a mustache and beard. He was a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator with a calm, natural disposition and was skilled at organization. Within the sect, his prestige was high. The sect elders and his fellow apprentice brothers held much confidence in him. However, this always calm, fully confident sect master Zhang was currently tensing his brow as he sat in the main hall's head seat. He somewhat helplessly watched an intense dispute in front of him between a middle-aged man and an old man. In the great hall, there were more than 10 other cultivators at both sides, each with a different expression. These were the stewards of Yellow Maple Valley. Elder Marshal Brother Murong, it is obvious that several months ago we had already distributed all of the Foundation establishment pills. However, my grandnephew's reservation was actually cancelled and given to a rogue cultivator. This is outrageous. The old man shouted with fury toward the direction of the middle-aged scholar. This was truly astonishing. This old man was undoubtedly much older than the middle-aged person, but he still addressed him as Elder Marshal Brother. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, this was not an accident. For the first time in several hundred years, someone had entered the sect through the use of a writ of immortal ascension. How could we ignore this? We must give this person a Foundation establishment pill, the middle-aged scholar calmly said with his expression unchanged. However, this person is simply not a person from a cultivator clan and is merely a rogue cultivator. Do we still have to give him a Foundation establishment pill under those circumstances? As I see it, simply letting him enter the sect is enough. With that much, he would regard that as a great fortune. The old man disputed while flushed with anger. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, these words should not be uttered. How do you know that his ancestors were not from a cultivator clan? Perhaps his clan simply declined, and then he became a rogue cultivator. Moreover, who can guarantee their own clan will not weaken with age? Perhaps one day Junior Marshal Brother Yi's clan will also decline. When the moment comes where one of the Yi clan's future generation brings the writ of immortal ascension, will our Yellow Maple Valley not give them a Foundation establishment pill and only have them enter the sect? If Junior Marshal Brother dares to swear this poisonous oath in front of all as us, I, Mu Rongshan, will turn around and leave alone the matter of the Foundation establishment pill. The middle-aged man's composed and confident words turned the old man's face white then green, leaving him speechless. How could the old man possibly dare to swear such a troublesome oath? Even if he were to swear it, only he would stand aside and leave the matter. Who knew whether others would step in? However, why must my grandnephew's pill be given away? Are the others out of the question? The old man asked, unreconciled. You must ask why this Junior Marshal Brother's grandnephew is far too lacking. When tested, his rank was actually near last. The middle-aged man shook his head with the appearance of regret. Seeing the person across from him act in this manner, the roots of the old man's teeth ached with hatred. However, for the benefit of his grandnephew, he couldn't do anything to him. With great resolve, he continued, my grandnephew's ranking is truly a bit poor, but he is not last in the ranking of those that have not yet taken the Foundation establishment pill. Are there not still 2 others? Junior Marshal Brother is correct. There are 2 others that were tested and ranked lower than your grandnephew. However, those 2's circumstances are truly unusual. They simply have grievances toward Junior Marshal Brother's grandnephew, the middle-aged man said with a voice of great pity. What is unusual? If you don't give me a convincing reason, I will not swallow the tone of your voice. The old man was nervous and let out fierce words. Such a willful display, what is there not to swallow? Those 2 people are truly unusual. Skipping over these 2, Junior Marshal Brother's apprentice was chosen. I had also agreed to this. As for the grounds, Junior Marshal Brother need not ask. I can give you an explanation. Zhang Lingdao, having seen the old man unexpectedly say such words, lowered his face and berated him. Seeing Zhang Lingdao speak in such a way, the old man's heart trembled with fear. He only knew that during the test, that there should have been 2 behind his grandnephew. As for who, he truly did not know. This left him truly indignant and dissatisfied. Could it be there was truly some sort of exception that caused even the strict and impartial sect master to side with them? Zhang Lingdao waved his hand, gesturing the middle-aged scholar to return to his original seat. He then sighed and said, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, I fear that this time I truly must wrong your grandnephew. Of those 2 people, one is Marshal Aunt Hongfu's sole descendant from the secular world. That is why, although the young girl originally did not meet the test standards, I had chosen her to enter the list of those who will receive the Foundation establishment pill. Surely Junior Marshal Disciple doesn't want to take away this person's Foundation establishment pill. When the old man heard the name Hongfu, he was startled. His complexion immediately undergone a great change and was filled with fear and trepidation. Since it is Martial Aunt Hong Fu's descendant, it is only natural to take care of her. How could this little brother disrespect his elders in this way? This little brother is convinced of this person's arrangement and concedes. The old man spoke with his face somewhat pale. Having seen the old man's expression as such, great Sectmaster Zhang was not at all surprised. After all, she was the sole female descendant of the Yellow Maple Valley's core formation expert, Martial Aunt Hong Fu, whose temper was known to all. If he truly deprived the young girl's qualifications to Foundation establishment, the old man wouldn't just be out of luck, perhaps even this Sectmaster would have no good days ahead of him. And the other one, the old man was still unresigned. Although he knew this remaining person was certain to have sufficient justification, he was still asked with a mind grasping for a fluke. As for the remaining one, his body has a strange wind attribute spiritual root. Is this enough justification? Zhang Lingdao unhurriedly answered as he twirled his long beard with his fingers. When the old man heard this, he remained silent. Yellow Maple Valley sect rules had an article that stated, heavenly roots and unusual spiritual roots took precedence in Foundation establishment. There was nothing he could complain about. However, although his grandnephew was not his grandson by blood, ever since he entered the sect, he dearly looked at his growth since the very first days. He was even more intimate toward him than his very own grandsons. How could he have the heart to tell him that his qualifications for Foundation establishment had been revoked? Then my grandnephew is truly without hope. It should be known that if he were to wait another 10 years, he would miss the optimal period to reach Foundation establishment and would lose his chance to enter Foundation establishment in this lifetime. The old man's words were somewhat bleak, stirring up a burst of whispers among those seated. Junior Martial Brother Yi, there is actually a way. A somewhat gloomy, long-faced old man with a hawk nose stood and consoled the old man surnamed Yi. What? Senior Martial Brother Wu has a method. When old man Yi heard this, his spirit shook. Within the sect, this senior brother Wu was well known for being resourceful. Perhaps he truly had a method. The old man surnamed Wu slightly smiled and didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned to Zhang Lingdao and saluted to him, asking him with a clear voice, "May I ask, Sect Master, what were the properties of the spiritual roots of the person who brought the writ of immortal ascension? Have you tested him yet? What was his aptitude?" It seemed to be not particularly good. Junior Martial Brother Wang, you personally tested him. Why don't you tell us? Zhang Lingdao asked someone from the left side of the row. Yes, Elder Martial Brother, Sect Master. A middle-aged wearing light green clothes stood and indifferently said, this person's age is not old. He is 18 or 19 years of age. He has reached early 9th layer in a wood attribute foundation cultivation technique. His spiritual roots are the 4 attributes except for metal. They could be classified as false spiritual roots. From judging as a whole, this person's aptitudes are at the bottom. However, he has come across fortuitous encounters and diligently trained. Otherwise, how else could he reach his current state? If he were to have no other strokes of luck in this lifetime, he would at most train to his foundation cultivation technique until the 11th or 12th layer, unable to enter foundation establishment. Even if he were to take a foundation establishment pill, his odds of entering foundation establishment are only 1%. Good. The old man surnamed Wu waited until Junior Brother Wang said this before loudly interrupting. What is good? The old man surnamed Yi could not help but ask. The others looked at the old man surnamed Wu with doubtful gazes. Only Zhang Lingdao wrinkled his brow. He already had a bit of a guess in his mind. May I ask, Sect Master, if the person that came took the initiative to renounce the foundation establishment pill, would it be regarded as going against our promise? The old man surnamed Wu asked. Of course, however, no one is allowed to use threats or force to accomplish this matter. Otherwise, our Yellow Maple Valley's reputation will be ruined. Sect Master Zhang softly and solemnly said. He, Sect Master, please feel at ease. This is only natural. The old man surnamed Wu faintly smiled and then turned his head toward the old man surnamed Yi, saying, Junior Martial Brother Yi, you don't mind spending a few items to purchase his foundation establishment pill, right? It should be known with such lowly aptitude, the rate of success to enter foundation establishment is pitifully small. This should be a great opportunity. He can to renounce the establishment foundation pill to obtain something far more practical. The old man named Wu said with a fully confident appearance. Chapter 145, The Unexpected Guest. Chapter 145, The Unexpected Guest. That's right, Senior Marshal Brother Wu truly has a good idea. The old man surnamed Yi's two eyes shined with excitement. Then he turned his head to Zhang Lingdao and expectantly requested, Sect Master, could I see the owner of the writ of immortal ascension? I wish to do business with him and exchange something for his voluntary renouncement of the Foundation establishment pill. When Zhang Lingdao heard this, he muttered to himself hesitantly before nodding. However, he reminded the old man that he mustn't overstep his boundaries and force the transaction before letting Junior Marshal Brother Wang see the uninvited guest. The old man and Junior Marshal Brother Wang exited the main hall. After stepping on a leaf-shaped magic tool, they immediately soared into the sky toward Yellow Maple Valley's guest-welcoming building. In a room of the Yellow Maple Valley's guest-welcoming building, a youth was lying on a bed, looking at the roof while lost in thought. He was precisely Han Li who followed them to Yellow Maple Valley after the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly's conclusion. After Han Li had killed the two cultivators who ambushed him, with no further external encounters, he hurried to some hidden mountain peak in the Land Province to participate in the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly that was soon to convene and compare what he saw with the desperately fought tournaments described by Hu Pingu. After the life-and-death contests, with each stage having a final victor, the 7 great sects representatives finally emerged. Yellow Maple Valley's representative was that Junior Marshal Brother Wang. After having seen Yellow Maple Valley's representative and taking a moment of careful deliberation, he still resolved himself to take the risk and hand over the writ of immortal ascension for this man to see, causing the representative to be startled. The representative immediately stated that he could bring Han Li back to the sect. As for the specifics towards him and the writ of immortal ascension, it would be the decision of their sect master. After all, regaining the writ of immortal ascension was a matter 400 to 500 years overdue. Han Li was naturally unopposed, otherwise he would have to find Yellow Maple Valley's mountain entrance by himself. It would be far too exhausting for him. Like that, the other cultivators looked at Han Li with gazes of amazement. He sat on an immense boat-shaped magic tool with 10 victors from the tournament and the representative Junior Marshal Brother Wang. When he returned to Yellow Maple Valley, he was brought here to wait for a reply. As for the other 10, they had parted. It was unknown where they had gone. Han Li waited here for 3 to 4 days and did not leave his room. Aside from an 11 to 12-year-old male servant delivering him food every day on schedule, he did not see anyone else. It wasn't that Han Li was actually obedient and sincere, but after that representative surnamed Wang arranged his living conditions and tested his spiritual root attributes, he immediately told him that because he still wasn't a disciple of Yellow Maple Valley, the room would have a few restrictive techniques. For the time being, he would be unable to leave the room, otherwise he would trigger the restrictive techniques, causing him to be restrained. Having heard the representative surnamed Wang, Han Li naturally did not bring embarrassment upon himself. In addition, after having become aware that he possessed 4 attribute false spiritual roots, Han Li's mood took a turn for the worse. Although Han Li already knew that his own cultivation aptitude was rather poor, after hearing it with his own ears, he became sad and dispirited for an entire day. It seemed that if he wished to remain on his path of cultivation, he would have to rely on the external power of medicine pills and such. However, after he ascended to the 9th layer of the Eternal Spring Arts, he felt the effectiveness of Yellow Dragon Pellet and Golden Essence Pill greatly lessening. They did not aid him as greatly as before. It seemed he must find several other spiritual medicine recipes and concoct some medicine pills truly fit for a cultivator, else the pace of his cultivation would be delayed. Just as Han Li was immersed in thought, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. In addition, it was the sound of not just one person. Han Li roused his spirit. It seemed that after suffering through several days, the information he was waiting for had come. "Young friend, have you become accustomed to living here?" The room's door softly opened, and the voice of the representative named Wang spoke. This man soon entered the room, followed by a blushing old man. "Greetings, Immortal Wang." Han Li immediately jumped from the bed and respectfully greeted him. He was fully aware that nobody would find fault with extra courtesy. Were he to humble his attitude a bit, he would only receive benefit and no detriments. "This is," Han Li glanced at the old man and asked, puzzled. "This is my senior marshal brother, surnamed Yi." Junior Marshal Brother Wang smiled and then explained. Surnamed Yi? Han Li was startled. Could it be that the matter of having taken the writ after killing monk Golden Light was revealed? Was it the Yi clan member who sought him? However, although this old man's complexion wasn't too good, he did not have the appearance of great anger. It seemed he had some other mysterious reason. Hanley felt apprehensive, though this was not expressed in the slightest on his face. With the same respectful tone, he said, "So it was immortal Yi." The old man sized up Han Li once through. How could Han Li look and feel so terribly ordinary? There wasn't anything the slightest bit out of the ordinary. He couldn't help but feel uncertain toward his purpose coming here. As a result, after he heard Han Li's greeting, he put on a gracious face and smiled, saying, "He. Young friend Han need not be overly courteous. Since young friend Han arrived to our Yellow Maple Valley holding the writ of immortal ascension, young friend is already a sect disciple. Calling me martial uncle Yi will suffice. You need not regard yourself as an outsider." After Han Li heard the old man's words, his heart greatly lightened. However, his mind was still somewhat unconvinced. Since the other party had spoken so politely, it seems he did not have a vendetta against him. Though wasn't this level of politely a bit too excessive? How could he be said to not be an outsider? Han Li was at a loss. Young friend Han, senior martial brother Yi did not speak wrongly. The current sect master had already agreed to allow young friend to become a sect disciple. In addition, a foundation establishment pill has been prepared for young friend. Junior martial brother Wang said with a light smile. Truly, when the always steady and calm Han Li heard those words, he could not help but grow excited. He wished he could dance for joy and vent his feelings. Seeing Han Li act in such a manner, junior martial brother Wang smiled. He did not feel very surprised. It seemed he had already predicted Han Li's reaction. "Junior martial brother Wang, I wish to speak with martial nephew Han alone. Could you withdraw for a moment?" The old man had grown somewhat impatient and finally spoke what he wanted to ever since he entered the room. Of course, this junior martial brother will return to sect master first. After senior martial brother and martial nephew Han finish speaking, come back together. Junior martial brother Wang inwardly sighed. After giving Han Li a faint glance, he left the room. At this moment, the only two remaining in the room were old man Yi and Han Li. Han Li was stunned at what had happened before him. How could this one surnamed Wang just walk away after being told? The one left along with him, the fellow calling himself martial uncle, what matter does he have to speak with him? Although he didn't know what this senior martial brother Yi was up to, Han Li had a faintly bad premonition. The old man saw that Han Li was uneasy, but he didn't care in the slightest. He was convinced the things he could put forward were certain to cause this youth inexperienced with the world to widely open his eyes and smoothly complete the transaction. Martial nephew Han, martial uncle is a straightforward person, therefore I will not beat around the bush and openly say it. My business is related to your given foundation establishment pill. I wish to purchase it from martial nephew. What does martial nephew think about it? The old man got right to the point. He actually wants to purchase my foundation establishment pill. Did he not mishear? How could he sell it to someone else? When Han Li heard this, he was shocked. However, soon after, his complexion greatly changed and became unsightly. Martial nephew Han, do not hesitate to be at ease. I will not offer nothing in exchange for martial nephew's foundation establishment pill. 7 or 8 mid-grade spirit stones, a few elementary mid to high-grade spiritual talismans, and several kinds of first-rate magic tools. Martial uncle still can bring out more things. If these truly won't do, martial uncle still has a few magic power progressing medicine pills. Although they are incapable of being compared to a foundation establishment pill, they are spiritual medicines hard to come by even in the sect. The old man hastily explained after clearly seeing Han Li's complexion change. After Han Li heard these words, his complexion was much better. He heard the sincerity in the other party's words. It seemed this martial uncle had no intention of harshly and unreasonably scramble to rob him. Indeed, he truly wished to buy his foundation establishment pill. Chapter 146, Closing a Deal. Chapter 146, Closing a Deal. Although I have never seen the foundation establishment pill with my own eyes, I, Han Li, know its value and its importance very clearly. Think about it. At the Tian Wudai Great Immortal Ascension Assembly, nearly thousands of cultivators fought a battle of life and death. And for what? Wasn't it because of the temptation of this foundation establishment pill? And this martial uncle, he thinks he could just trade it away with some spirit stones and magic tools. Does he really think that I am some youngster who just came from the mountains? Hanley thought to himself while laughing coldly on the inside. But on the outside he appeared respectful, as if he was truly listening carefully to what the martial uncle Yi had to say. The old man surnamed Yi was satisfied with Han Li's response. After all, this future disciple didn't reject him as soon as he brought up the trade for the Foundation establishment pill. It seemed like this could go somewhere. He never thought that he could easily trade the Foundation establishment pill with the items that were mentioned earlier from the very beginning. Anyone who was not an idiot would know to not trade this precious item for something so cheap. What he said earlier was merely a test. But now, looking at Han Li's attitude, there seemed to be the possibility of negotiation. He was overjoyed. If Han Li was willing to trade, the old man was very confident that he could satisfy Han Li's demands and trade it for the Foundation establishment pill. Just thinking about it made the old man surnamed Yi's smile grow even wider. It even felt like Han Li was less of an eyesore than before. Martial Nephew Han, I'm sure you know about the attribute of your spiritual roots. To be honest, with Martial Nephew's aptitude, even by taking the Foundation establishment pill, the rate of successfully entering Foundation establishment is very low. At most, the Foundation establishment pill would boost your magic power and maybe level up your basic powers 2 or 3 layers. If so, taking the Foundation establishment pill would be too wasteful. To Martial Nephew, it would be best to trade it for something more practical and worthy, if... The old man started talking endlessly to tempt Han Li. Even though Han Li looked like he was paying close attention to Martial Uncle Yi, he was already analyzing, calculating the pros and cons in his head. Honestly, he knew very well that what the old man said was true. The chance of attaining Foundation establishment after taking merely one Foundation establishment pill was almost too low. But if Han Li gave up the Foundation establishment pill that easily, he wouldn't forgive himself. Because even if the chances were low, wasn't there still a slight possibility of success? But if he doesn't give up the Foundation establishment pill to this Martial Uncle Yi in front of him, then his life in Yellow Maple Valley would definitely be unenjoyable. It was likely he would cause this person to hold a grudge for no reason. He also seemed to have some power in the Yellow Maple Valley. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. Martial Uncle Yi, may I please ask who you are requesting the Foundation establishment pill for? I am sure that Martial Uncle Yi doesn't need this item anymore. Han Li thought for a while and decided to probe the old man's intentions. Even though the old man was interrupted by Han Li, he did not seem unhappy at all. Hearing Han Li's question, he hesitated a little but still told Han Li. Since you asked, I, Martial Uncle, have nothing to hide. I am requesting this Foundation establishment pill for someone surnamed Yi's grandnephew. Will Martial Nephew please fulfill our wish? Han Li laughed bitterly in his heart after hearing this, and thought, Grandnephew, I guess that's a tight enough family relationship. If he can make the Martial Uncle Yi try so hard, and to even ask to trade the Foundation establishment pill from a junior, he must be extremely lovable. Looks like if I really don't trade with him, there is 100% chance that I will provoke this old man. After that, I would never be able to settle in the Yellow Maple Valley. I can only swallow my pain and agree to trade. As for how I'm going to achieve Foundation establishment, I will have to think of some other ways in the future. I still have that mysterious little bottle, and if I have the recipe in time, what medicine can I make? After Han Li finished considering the pros and cons, he had made his choice. However, he wanted to get the most out of the trade, so he acted as if he was struggling and having trouble deciding. Martial Uncle, it's not that Junior is disrespecting Senior, but the Foundation establishment pill is also incredibly important to Martial Nephew. Even if Junior has low potential, isn't there still a sliver of hope? If I just give up this opportunity to become Foundation establishment now, then Junior would really have no chance with the Great Path. After the old man heard Han Li out, he couldn't help but to scoff in silence. He thought to himself, you can't possibly be considering the higher path with your low qualification. You are completely overestimating your own abilities. But on the surface, the old man was still persuading him patiently from different angles while making a lot of empty promises. He continued to pressure and change Han Li's decision into agreeing to trade the Foundation establishment pill. Hearing these empty promises, Han Li laughed coldly in his heart, but he kept on saying words with uncertainty and making himself sound even weaker. This thrilled the old man even more, as he continued to bargain with an even higher price. Martial Nephew, if you are willing to give up the Foundation establishment pill, I can let you choose any chore you want from the chores that the disciples at the valley are required to do. Seeing Han Li was on the edge of agreeing to the deal, he finally played his trump card. Chores? Han Li was really stunned this time. Yes, you should know that the low-level disciples at Yellow Maple Valley must complete an assignment every month. For example, going to a few mines and supervise the miners, be an administrative disciple at a city market owned by our sect, take care of the valley's rare creatures, or growing some wonderful spiritual medicines. Based on how the job was completed, the sect will hand out some low-grade spiritual stones to these disciples as a reward. And I, Marshal Uncle, am responsible for distributing these types of jobs in the valley. So if there are any jobs that Marshal Nephew would like, it would be all up to me. The old man surnamed Yi said proudly, seeming like he truly did have the power and confidence. But having listened to this, Han Li was speechless. It seemed like no matter where he was, there were always people who used their powers for their self-interest, including major cultivation sects like the Yellow Maple Valley. But when he mentioned the job about planting incredible medicinal plants, it interested Han Li. He felt like this job was made for him. Additionally, Marshal Uncle Yi already promised a lot of good deals. If he kept dragging it out, it might start to seem like he was being too greedy, so he should close the deal when he could. Right about now, Han Li finally acted like he was moved, and said to the old man in a bitter tone, "Since Marshal Uncle Yi has gone out of his way like this, if I still don't agree to trade with you, it would seem like I'm not giving you face. If you can really give me what you promised, then your grandnephew can have Marshal Nephew's Foundation Establishment pill. I hope your grandnephew can successfully reach Foundation Establishment." Once the old man heard this, he was delighted and sincerely promised, "Marshal Nephew doesn't have to worry about a thing. Marshal Uncle always delivers on his promises. But when we meet the sect leader later, you are free to tell him about the trade that was on the table, but don't bring up the deal that we had privately." Han Li took the hint, smiled, and humored him. "I can assure Marshal Uncle Jr. knows what to do. I would not do something that stupid." Hearing this, the old man broke into a smile. He was very satisfied with Han Li's cooperative behavior. Chapter 147, The Particulars Within the Valley. Chapter 147, The Particulars Within the Valley. After Han Li and Old Man Yi finished their business, Han Li was brought to the main hall on a flying magic tool toward the main hall to reply to Yellow Maple Valley's Sect Master Zhang Lingdao. Not long after, Han Li stood in front of the immense stone palace hall that was several tens of meters tall and was curiously sizing up several Yellow Maple Valley disciples who were standing guard at the gate. These people's magic power was far more profound than Han Li's. At the very least, they had reached the 10th layer or higher of their foundation cultivation technique. Han Li could not help but be inwardly surprised toward this sect's cultivators' strength and impressive appearance. Just a moment ago, when he and Old Man Yi arrived at this place, Old Man Yi had him first stay outside the hall. He was to wait for Sect Master Zhang's summons before going in by himself. This caused Han Li to awkwardly wait outside the palace hall, making him break into a string of silent curses. After a long while, a white-clothed middle-aged man came outside and directly arrived in front of Han Li. He coldly said, "Follow me in. Sect Master summons you." Then, without waiting for a response from Han Li, he returned, paying heed only to himself. Han Li inwardly smiled bitterly. It seemed a 9th-layer qi condensation cultivator such as himself simply could not be put into the person's eyes. He didn't want to say more than a single phrase to him. Although he was discontent toward this person's arrogance, Han Li clearly understood his own importance here and obediently followed after him, entering the main hall. After passing through 3 large gates guarded by disciples, Han Li then saw Yellow Maple Valley's Sect Master Zhang Lingdao, a middle-aged man with a long 3-strand beard. On the 2 sides of the large hall sat more than 10 people, each differently clothed. When Han Li entered, after he sized up Han Li a moment and saw that his appearance was common and uninteresting, he shifted his vision away, uninterested. In addition, that Old Man Yi and that junior martial brother Wang were also sitting within. "This young fellow is called Han Li," sect leader Zhang serenely asked. "That is right. Disciple Han Li meets sect master." Han Li appeared to very sincerely step forward and formally salute him. There is no need to be overly polite. Since young friend carries the writ of immortal ascension, this sect master will certainly respect the rules established by our exalted predecessors and have young friend enter the sect. Zhang Lingdao amiably smiled like a blowing spring wind and lightly brushed his sleeve. Just as Han Li was about to lower his body, he felt a soft incorporeal power around his thigh softly supporting him and rendering incapable of continuing to formally pay his respects. This had startled him, and he felt some reverence toward the sect master. Not only will young friend enter the sect, but he will also obtain the qualifications to take the Foundation Establishment pill. I heard Junior Marshal Brother Yi said that young friend renounced his Foundation Establishment pill and gave it to someone else. Is this true? Sect Master Zhang did not speak much rubbish and directly spoke of the purpose of his summon to the palace hall. That is right, Sect Master. Disciple feels his aptitude is lacking, and taking the Foundation Establishment pill is truly too extravagant. Instead, I gave this precious item to a senior martial brother who needed it more. After Han Li uttered these words, he felt his heart faintly ache. This was because of the Foundation Establishment pill. This wasn't some kind of ordinary medicine pill that he could eat between meals. If one were to release a Foundation Establishment pill into the world of cultivation, it would be a wonder if it hadn't stirred up the winds of a bloody rain. Although he could rely on his mysterious small bottle, he had no confidence that he could perfectly refine a spiritual pill like the Foundation Establishment pill. These particular words he had just said were not from the heart. Han Li was very reluctant to part with it. However, his appearance was completely obedient and deferential, greatly satisfying the majority of those in the palace hall. Good, young friend Han, this sect master is greatly gratified by your decision. However, young friend should not hesitate to be at ease. This sect master will not let young friend perform this sacrifice in vain. After this was said, Zhang Lingdao turned his head and looked toward old man Yi. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, young friend Han releases his Foundation Establishment pill for the use of your grandnephew. However, Junior Marshal Brother must compensate young friend for his loss. You must satisfy him, Zhang Lingdao solemnly said. He, sect master, please feel at ease. I will definitely satisfy Marshal Nephew Han. The old man saw matters unfold as he imagined, smoothly reaching an agreement. He couldn't help but burst with joy, repeatedly agreeing in response. Having seen the old man appear this way, Zhang Lingdao fiddled with his long beard and faintly smiled. This difficult problem had unexpectedly been effortlessly resolved and satisfied both sides. This made the great sect master let out a sigh of relief. The matter of the Foundation Establishment pill has been resolved, and from this day onward, young friend Han will be a disciple of this sect. Junior Marshal Brother Wang, arrange Marshal Nephew Han's residence and briefly explain the Valley sect rules. First, have him see a cultivation guidance disciple. If there is remarkable progress, then there may be another promotion. Zhang Lingdao commanded Junior Marshal Brother Wang with words in a way dripping water would not reveal. I will follow your orders, sect master. Junior Marshal Brother Wang stood and accepted his commands. Thus, this Marshal Uncle Wang immediately brought Han Li out of the palace hall and started to explain a few of Yellow Maple Valley's various rules and tell him a few bits of general knowledge. Han Li attentively listened and more or less understood, formed an initial understanding of Yellow Maple Valley. Yellow Maple Valley had about 10,000 disciples in total. Of these disciples, at 90% were at the Qi condensation stage. There were only a few hundred Foundation Establishment stage disciples. Those people were the central power of Yellow Maple Valley. Above them were Great Core Formation stage experts. There were only a few several. They were fundamentally in seclusion year-round and were no longer interested with the affairs of the valley. Unless it was a major event involving the life or death of Yellow Maple Valley, Sect Master Zhang would ordinarily not see these people's faces. As for the sole nascent soul expert in the valley, he was the martial uncle ancestor of Sect Master Zhang and his subordinates. It was said that he was already over 900 years old. Not only was his magic power unfathomably deep and his Taoist techniques thoroughly profound, his nascent soul could exit his body and mentally journey thousands of li away. He was a true immortal on this earth. However, this elder had long left the valley and was no longer within the state of Yue. He had already left to travel to other various countries. Who knows when he would return to the valley? As the Qi condensation disciples were quite numerous in the valley, it was impossible for all of them to consume the Foundation Establishment pill. Only the most outstanding disciples with the best aptitudes would be able to have this privilege. Therefore, every 10 years, the valley's disciples who were younger than 30 would engage in a series of selections. The competition's fierceness was not at all inferior to the external Great Immortal Ascension Assembly. On the whole, only true cultivation geniuses who practiced their foundation cultivation technique to the 11th or even 12th layer could distinguish themselves and obtain the qualifications for a Foundation Establishment pill. Of the several hundred best disciples who passed the strict selection, only 20 to 30 would enter Foundation Establishment after taking the Foundation Establishment pill. The rest would at best advance their magic power a step and reach the peak of their foundation cultivation technique, but never pass it. Naturally, the disciples in the valley were divided into 3 levels of hierarchy. The lowest were the disciples who had not yet taken a foundation establishment pill. These people were the most numerous within the valley, and their magic power were the most shallow. These people ordinarily undertook lowly tasks and cultivated for the least amount of time. However, although they may be the lowest ranked in the valley, they had quite a grand name: honored disciples. The honored in honored disciples also means attendant. With slightly higher positions were those who had taken the foundation establishment pill, but were unable to enter the foundation establishment stage. These disciples' foundation cultivation technique had basically reached their peak. Their magic power was far greater than those honored disciples. They were even able to use a few simple mid-grade cultivation techniques. As a result, they assumed the duty of leading and administering these numerous honored disciples. They were commonly called consul disciples. Those with the highest positions were the disciples who had entered foundation establishment. They were the favorites of the heavens and were regarded as true immortal cultivators, true experts who had stepped foot on the path of immortal cultivation. After these people succeeded in entering foundation establishment, they were permitted to find a region with abundant spiritual chi and create an immortal's cave to cultivate alone. They need not undertake any lowly tasks and only concentrate on cultivating. In addition, every year they would be granted all sorts of uncommon materials and a large amount of spirit stones to support and expedite their cultivation. Their sole duty was to aid the sect when it encountered great enemies. To disobey this order was unacceptable. Apart from the disciples of Yellow Maple Valley, there were the true powers that controlled the sect from within, the many stewards. These stewards were those disciples who, after entering foundation establishment, cultivated for an amount of time and were aware that they were unable to enter core formation. They voluntarily renounced their continued cultivation and were willing to enter the inner valley specialized administration, performing various duties. Old Man Yi and those tens of people within the main hall were all these kinds of stewards. Actually, Sect Master Zhang Lingdao was a high-level steward. However, he took charge of the entire sect's overall planning and was the steward of all the stewards. True decisions regarding the life or death of the sect were decided by those reclusive core formation experts. Their mere existence allowed Yellow Maple Valley to be viewed upon as one of the towering 7 great immortal sects, and made it so that evil spirits dared not to cause harm to the sect. Otherwise, Yellow Maple Valley of the 7 great immortal sects would have already been long exterminated countless times from those demons with profound magic power. Naturally, the information mentioned above did not come from this martial Uncle Wang, but was secretly inferred by Han Li from inquiries and martial Uncle Wang's words. This allowed Han Li to have a clear understanding of his status and environment. This would later be of no small assistance to him when interacting with fellow sect disciples. Chapter 148 Old Man in Gray. Chapter 148 Old Man in Gray. Martial Uncle Wang took Han Li with him on a leaf-shaped magic tool and flew for a couple of hours. They landed on a lush verdant mountain range, within an area crowded with flat houses. These shabby houses were built using rocks from the mountain, and there wasn't a single person inside these houses. They seemed like they were all empty, and this puzzled Han Li. Don't be surprised. These houses are truly empty. This place is meant for the new disciples to live in until they improve their magic power, then they will move out and look for somewhere else to live. It happens it is currently the beginning of the 10-year rotational cycle. The new disciples haven't joined the sect yet, so the houses are temporarily empty. Martial Uncle Wang spotted Han Li's confusion and explained softly. This cleared Han Li's bewilderment. Martial Uncle Wang led Han Li the way as they walked among houses, making so many turns that Han Li felt dizzy. Then they finally stopped at a house that was larger than the other normal stone houses. He didn't explain much to Han Li and started yelling loudly. Junior Martial Brother Lin, open the door. I brought a new disciple to pick up the items. As soon as Martial Uncle Wang finished yelling, the door opened outwards automatically in a whoosh. Seeing this, Martial Uncle Wang walked in without any hesitation. Han Li paused a little and followed him into the house. Inside the house, it was more spacious than it looked outside. This amazed Han Li, wondering what the house was tempered with. But the specific situation inside the house gave Han Li a certain feeling, and it was the word messy. All kinds of different items were piled here and there. Some were clothes, some were weapons such as knives and swords, but from the wave of spiritual power the weapons were giving off, they seemed to actually be pretty well-made magic tools. Aside from these things, there were also some other daily items such as shovels and hammers. Those items were also giving off strong spiritual power. It seemed like the items had been refined into something like a magic tool. This broadened Han Li's horizons. What kind of special effect did these tools have? At the center of the house, there was an 8-seater square table. Facing the door and sitting behind the table was an old man in gray clothes with fluffy hair. The old man ignored them as the two of them walked in the house, instead being focused on a small, shiny knife, carving a yellow wood about the size of his palms that he held in his hands. Martial Uncle Wang saw this. He frowned slightly, but his facial expression turned back to normal immediately. He didn't walk up and interrupt the old man working. Instead, he pulled a chair from the corner of the room, sat across the old man, and waited quietly for the old man to finish carving the wood. Han Li blinked his eyes when he saw the situation, and stood behind Martial Uncle Wang without saying a word while waiting sensibly with him. The old man in gray was moving his hands fast like the wind, while wood chips fell from in between his finger. After merely the time it took to make a cup of tea, a lifelike little monkey appeared within his palms. Junior Martial Brother Lin's carving skills have improved a lot since the last time I saw you, Martial Uncle Wang just then complimented while smiling. It's nothing impressive. I had nothing to do, so I was just killing time. How come Martial Brother Wang has the time to come and visit my humble residence? The old man in gray said carelessly, but his eyes were already looking straight at Han Li and seemed to have guessed what the two of them were doing here. It's nothing too important. Just wanted to get the equipments that all new disciples who join the Valley sect would receive for this martial nephew Han. He smiled and answered. Didn't all the new disciples from the Immortal Ascension Assembly receive their equipments? How come there's another one? And his aptitude is so poor. Did our sect leader Zhang's standards really become that low? He would recruit someone so untalented into the valley. The old man in gray said bluntly right in front of Han Li, making Han Li sound completely useless. From his tone of attitude, it doesn't seem like he respected the sect leader Zhang as much either. Hearing this, Han Li naturally felt extremely awkward, and Martial Uncle Wang was also smiling bitterly. He knew that because of what happened back then, this junior martial brother Lin had been holding a grudge against their senior martial brother, the sect leader, ever since. But in front of this junior Han Li, how could he possibly pick on the young? So he coughed a little and changed the topic. Junior martial brother, this martial nephew Han was the one who brought the writ of immortal ascension and joined us in the Yellow Maple Valley. It counts as an exception, so his aptitude is not important. What's important is that the sect needs to keep our promise. The writ of immortal ascension. The old man in gray was very surprised and looked at Han Li once again. Tusk, if you say so, then this fellow must have a lot of luck and he can take a foundation establishment pill. The old man said with a loud voice and looked at him with a look that said, Fellow, you're truly a lucky bee *** starred. Normally that would be the case. But martial nephew Han and martial brother Yi made a deal, and he gave up this foundation establishment pill automatically, Martial Uncle Wang smiled and mentioned. Gave up the foundation establishment pill. The old man was startled at first, but for some reason his expression darkened right away, and after a moment of silence, he said something that surprised Han Li. It's a good thing he could give it up. The most important thing about being human is knowing your limits, knowing what to give up and what to take at this young age. This quality is a lot stronger in him than in me. The expression of the old man in gray seemed to be incredibly lonely. The expression in his eyes, which were originally cold, became more kind. But after Han Li heard what the old man said, he was confused and didn't take it to heart. Knowing your limits, that was because I had no choice, so I gave up the precious foundation establishment pill. If it weren't so, who would give it up? Without Han Li mentioning the complaints his heart, the old man suddenly put on a straight face and stood up. He used his hands to lightly and continuously claw at the space around them. An item suddenly appeared in his hand, and the items kept increasing. The whole process stunned Han Li. A yellow silk shirt, a azure leaf magic tool, an everyday refinery set, one fierce sun sword and cold moon saber each, and a 10-fold storage pouch. The old man listed all the items in his hands coldly and put them on the table. The items are all here. Little fellow, take them away. As for Martial Brother Wang, who is a busy person, I will not ask you to stay. Please see yourselves out. After saying this, the old man took out another piece of wood from his chest, started sculpting once again, no longer paying attention to the two of them. Seeing this, Martial Uncle Wang sighed, stopped saying anything else, and told Han Li to pick up the items. As soon as the two of them walked out of the stone house, the door automatically closed up with a loud bang. Martial Uncle Wang looked at the shut door and shook his head. He then prepared to leave the place with Han Li. "Oh, you don't have to carry that many items in your arms, just put them in your storage pouch." Martial Uncle Wang turned around and saw Han Li carrying everything in his arms, standing like an idiot beside him. His foolish look amused him, so he spoke to remind him. After Han Li heard what he said, he put the things in his arms on the ground and found the black cloth pouch among the items. "This is the tenfold storage pouch." Han Li was a little confused. He picked up the pouch, looked at the incredibly small opening, and then looked at the enormous swords and items. He hesitated a little since he didn't know how to stuff them in the pouch. "This is your first time using a storage pouch, so let me demonstrate." Martial Uncle Wang was understanding. After he recognized Han Li's confusion, he reached over and took the pouch. "All you have to do is aim the opening of the pouch at what you want to put in, inject some magic power into the pouch, and focus on the item. It will be sucked in automatically," Martial Uncle Wang said as he demonstrated it himself. He pointed the opening downwards and the white light in his hand flickered. A bright, white light shot out from the pouch and covered everything that was on the ground. Those items immediately shrunk under the white light, and as soon as they reached a certain size, they were sucked into the pouch. Han Li, who was watching on the side, was surprised and amazed. "You use the same method when you want to take out an item. You just have to focus on the item that you want to take out with your magic power beforehand," Martial Uncle Wang said as he returned the pouch to Han Li. "But there are a few rules when it comes to using the storage pouch. Martial Nephew Han, you must remember them carefully." Martial Uncle Wang put his hands behind his back and spoke seriously. Hearing this, Han Li nodded like a chicken pecking rice. "Firstly, the storage pouch can only hold and shrink a certain amount or size of items. If the pouch sucked in something that's too big or too many in quantity, it will lose its ability, and you won't be able to put more items inside of it anymore. Secondly, the storage pouch cannot store living things. If you put a live creature inside it, then it will die for sure. Lastly, and also the most important rule you must keep at heart, low-grade storage pouches do not have the ability to recognize their owner, so whoever steals your storage pouch can take the items inside. Hence, don't reveal your storage pouch easily in front of other cultivators. You should hide it carefully, or else you could get into serious trouble." Chapter 149 Chores. Chapter 149 Chores. After Han Li heard these words, he naturally kept them in mind. "Since you've received everything, come with me to see the cultivation guidance disciple." After Martial Uncle Wang said this, he brought Han Li to the flying magic tool and flew. On this flight, the distance they traveled was far shorter. In a blink of an eye, they arrived at the foot of the mountain. There was a huge stone building built into the mountain. The stone sign on the front of the building had the words Cultivation Guidance Pavilion written in golden characters. It was quite busy with a few young disciples nearby, entering and exiting. Martial Uncle Wang did not say anything this time and just walked in, taking the lead. Han Li closely followed behind. It was clear that a few disciples recognized this Martial Uncle Wang. They had continuously saluted and greeted him. Martial Uncle smiled with a nod. It seemed that his reputation in Yellow Maple Valley was truly quite good. After entering the stone building, Han Li unexpectedly discovered that the back half of the Cultivation Guidance Pavilion actually extended into the depths of the mountain. Its interior was extremely vast and had rows of stone doors standing side by side with disciples both entering and exiting through them. Just as Han Li thought to take a good look, Martial Uncle Wang pushed open the third room door on the right side and walked in heedlessly. This caused Han Li to hesitate somewhat. He did not know whether he should follow closely behind him. "Come in." Martial Uncle Wang did not have Han Li wait long. After a moment, he emerged from the doorway and called out to Han Li. There weren't many people in the room. Inside, there was a black-clothed disciple about 30 years old. He deferentially stood to the side of Martial Uncle Wang. After he saw Han Li enter, he kindly smiled toward him. "This is Wu Feng. He is responsible for the cultivation techniques of new disciples. If you have any questions with regards to cultivation techniques in the future, you can ask him for guidance. With regards to understanding elementary cultivation techniques, Wu Feng is of the top 10. Martial Uncle Wang's words held great admiration toward this fellow. "I request Senior Martial Brother Wu to give me much guidance in the future." Han Li respectfully saluted. He clearly understood that this person would be his cultivation technique master in the future. How could he slight him? Martial uncle praises me too much. In truth, I merely have a superficial, incomplete knowledge of cultivation techniques. I can exchange pointers with junior martial hand to gain understanding. This senior brother Wu politely added. Martial nephew Wu, I clearly understand your knowledge on cultivation techniques. There is no need to be too modest. I will hand over the matter of martial nephew Han's cultivation technique to you. Currently, I simply brought him so the two of you can be acquainted. After that, I still have to bring him to other places to introduce him. He will not be present here for long. Martial Uncle Wang was quite straightforward. After he said those words, elder martial brother Wu respectfully sent them off. They promptly departed from the room. Next, this martial Uncle Wang responsibly and diligently brought Han Li to several other essential places and introduced him to many honored disciples. Furthermore, he gave him an explanation of a few everyday matters to take notice of before returning him to the gray-clothed old man's stone house. He had Han Li choose a stone room to live in before leaving Han Li and returning alone. Han Li stood in front of the stone room he chose and sized up the simple and crude residence with a bitter smile. At this moment, he already knew that so long as he trained his foundation cultivation technique to the 10th layer, he would be able to leave and move to a residence in a place called the mysterious Earth Mountain. The disciples there would have much more freedom. Not only could they establish their own residence on the mountain, but there were also no restrictions on the style and dimensions of the houses. Han Li could not help but look forward to this. Although his cultivation technique had yet to reach the 10th layer, Han Li did not intend to stay at the stone house for long. Afterwards, he lightly smiled and suddenly took out the Flight Azure Leaf magic tool from his storage pouch. Then he poured magic power into the magic tool and tossed himself to the sky. Initially, Han Li was unfamiliar with this object, and he flew abruptly from left to right, high to low. It wasn't smooth in the least. However, not long after, he easily mastered it and could fly similarly to martial Uncle Wang, confidently and freely with his hands behind his back. Although this magic tool was easy to master and simple to control, it was obvious that it wasn't very fast. It was only a bit faster than a steed. This was not surprising as the disciples in the valley only had so much power. Although the Azure Leaf magic tool was a bit lacking, it was still Han Li's first time flying. Hence, he exhilaratingly amused himself for quite a while. After a hearty laugh, Han Li satisfied his craving for flight and directed the magic tool toward a certain direction. On the way, he brushed past several other disciples who were similarly flying. Perhaps it was because Han Li's face was quite unfamiliar, but the majority of these people looked at Han Li with several gazes of curiosity. However, when they saw that his cultivation technique was merely of the 9th layer, they disdainfully kept away. Although Han Li saw these people's actions, he did not show anything in his face. Even so, he inwardly released a bitter laugh several times. It seemed that these so-called great sect cultivators were not any different from mortals of the secular world. They were just as snobbish. Just as this thought passed through Han Li's mind, he arrived in front of a large building complex. Then, with large strides, he walked into a large hall with a sign that hung, 100 Opportunities Hall. Inside the hall was a middle-aged honored disciple. When he saw Han Li enter, he was somewhat surprised. He could not help but ask, "Junior Martial Brother Han, how did you return so quickly? What about Martial Uncle Wang?" This was a place Martial Uncle Wang had just hurriedly visited with Han Li. This was an honored disciple Han Li had just met. That was why when he saw Han Li return, he was greatly surprised. "Senior Martial Brother Yu, when I arrived here a moment ago, I heard this was the place where one could receive chores work, right?" "That's right. Could it be that Junior Martial Brother wants to receive an assignment so quickly?" Junior Martial Brother Han is a new disciple. According to the rules, you can first familiarize yourself with the circumstances within the sect for a month before you receive a task. There is no need to feel so anxious. The honored disciple spoke in astonishment. That's no issue. I currently want to find something to do. Are there any plant-growing jobs that currently lack manpower?" Han Li faintly smiled. "That is not how it works. All the missions that disciples receive are randomly distributed. Regardless of what you're up to, no one is allowed to select their duties. Only if they can prove that they truly have some respective ability in the field would they be given consideration." This honored disciple replied, embarrassed. When Han Li heard this, he creased his brow. Could it be he truly had to find Martial Uncle Yi? "It doesn't matter. Have Martial Nephew Han choose as he wishes." A somewhat familiar voice came from behind Han Li, slightly frightening him. He turned his head to look. It was unexpectedly that old man Yi. He did not know when he had stood behind him. He was smiling toward Han Li. Hall Master has returned. When the middle-aged honored disciple saw the old man, he immediately greeted him. And I have returned, the old man flippantly said. Martial Uncle Yi. Han Li immediately greeted him with respect. Martial Nephew Han came here quite quickly. I returned here to give my subordinates an explanation to let Martial Nephew Han select his tasks at will, he half-jokingly mentioned. It seemed that this Martial Uncle Yi's mood was pretty good. I am thankful for Martial Uncle's concern. I also came to take a look. Could I inconvenience Martial Uncle to find a suitable task? Han Li asked, apparently bashful. I am the one in charge here. What inconvenience is there? Honored disciple Yu, take out all the plant-growing tasks and let Han Li choose as he wishes. The old man magnanimously waved his hand, signaling his subordinate to follow his orders. This honored disciple Yu was dumbstruck by those words. After he took a deep glance toward Han Li, he hurriedly looked for the scrolls that recorded the chore tasks. In his mind, he could not help but think that he had some sort of relationship with his superior. The plant-growing tasks are all listed here. Take a careful look, Junior Martial Brother Han. Honored disciple Yu offered him the azure jade slips he returned with. Han Li said a word of thanks and took the slips. He earnestly looked through them. Look after the 13 5-flower trees. Every year, each of them produces 2 white fruits. With great care, take care of the 300-year-old fire cloud ginseng. Ensure that its spiritual nature is not lost. Grow a field of moon plum grass. Hand over 100 jin of its hay every season. TL, jin, equals 5 kg. Look after the yellow jade bamboo forest. The slips had all kinds of plant-growing work. There was truly a great amount. However, there were still a few that had yet to be read by Han Li. When he rummaged through the rest of the slips, a task much to Han Li's satisfaction was found. TL, the cunning, mysterious Earth Mountain is one of the 8 trigrams, it representing Earth. Chapter 150, Reluctant Consent. Chapter 150, Reluctant Consent. Take over the Azure Stone Mountain Range's 100 Medicine Garden. Requires a set amount of rare drug ingredients to be handed over every year. When Han Li saw the gold characters written on the slip, Han Li was extremely joyful. He raised his head toward honored disciple Yu and pointed to the slip, saying, I desire this task. Senior Martial Brother Yu, could you present this to me? After he heard Han Li's words, honored disciple Yu pieced together a smile. But once he clearly saw the task Han Li had picked, the cheerful smile on his face became forced. Junior Martial Brother, please pick another task. This garden task is extremely difficult. It doesn't suit Junior Martial Brother, honored disciple Yu very sincerely said. However, when he saw Han Li's puzzled appearance, he further explained, ever since the task was hung here several years ago, many have already attempted to compete it. However, all of them failed. Not only did they fail to receive an award, they were fined a great number of spirit stones. It could be said to be one of the most difficult tasks here. Even if Junior Martial Brother Han is joking, each disciple I assigned this slip to were quite talented in growing plants. After Han Li heard these words, he inwardly laughed. However, after some contemplation, he did not plan to give up. He modestly asked, could Senior Martial Brother tell me, in what way is this task difficult? How could there be no Senior Martial Brother that completed it? Isn't it just supervising the medicinal herbs in the garden? How is this hard? Could it be that Martial Nephew chose Senior Martial Brother Ma's medicine garden assignment? The nearby old man Yi, after heard these two's dialogue, did not wait for the middle-aged honored disciple to reply. He wrinkled his brow and rushed to interrupt them. That's right, Junior Martial Brother Han took a fancy to Senior Martial Uncle Ma's extremely difficult assignment. The middle-aged honored disciple did not know whether to laugh or cry. After the old man heard this, he wore an enigmatic smile. Haha, Martial Nephew Han truly knows how to choose. He actually fancied the most troublesome task. However, this task truly causes one's head to ache. There have already been a great many who were forced to receive this assignment and complained to me before. However, because Senior Martial Brother Ma was not willing to easily alter the conditions of rewards and penalties, I could not do anything. If Martial Nephew Han wishes to know the details of this task, he can follow me into the hall and take a look at the relevant files. It is much more compelling than hearing from the word of mouth. It was unknown why this 100 Opportunities Hall's Hall Master Yi was so forthright toward Han Li. He went as far as to open the door for him in passing. Han Li inwardly wrinkled his brow. This martial Uncle Yi was a bit too enthusiastic. Although he had given his foundation establishment pill to him, it had seemed to be an equal trade. Why was he acting so intimately toward him? Han Li strongly pushed aside the suspicions in his mind and put up an appearance of being overwhelmed by martial Uncle Yi's favor toward him. Then he followed the old man who took the slip to some room at the back of the main hall. All sorts of files were piled up in the room. The old man lightly waved his arm with the slip in his hand. Then the slip flashed, and a scroll flew toward into his hand. He offered the scroll to Han Li. Since he was already being offered, Han Li impolitely took the scroll and quickly rifled through it. The scroll's contents weren't long. It simply contained the written accounts of the disciples who were assigned to take care of the medicine garden. That was why Han Li looked through them quickly. A short moment later, he mostly understood the details and difficulty of the assignment. How about it? You should change to another assignment. Although this task's rewards are quite generous, it isn't something an ordinary disciple can accomplish, Martial Uncle Yi said with great concern. After Han Li heard those words, he muttered to himself for a moment. He firmly shook his head. Many thanks to Martial Uncle Yi. However, this task is much to my liking. I don't need to switch to another assignment because I am picking it. When the old man heard the determination in Han Li's words, he felt somewhat amazed. However, he said nothing else and nodded, giving his consent. He then immediately brought Han Li out of the room. After a moment of hesitation, he somewhat unnaturally added, Martial Nephew Han, with regards to the goods agreed from our deal with the Foundation Establishment Pill, could their delivery be slightly postponed? Martial Uncle has been recently wanting to refine a chi gathering pill. What I have at hand is truly rather limited. I fear it wouldn't be too convenient for me. However, Martial Nephew, please feel at ease. I will be able to repay my debt in full within a year. When Han Li heard these words, he was surprised for a moment. However, he immediately smiled. What is Martial Uncle Yi saying? Since it is inconvenient for Martial Uncle, I can give as much time as he needs. There is no need to bring up the matter of repayment in the future. This could be considered filial respect given to Martial Uncle from the younger generation. Han Li felt that currently he was acting truly falsely. His heart was undoubtedly depressed, and he loathed the other party's breach of their promise. However, his face wore a smiling expression and said the words that would make the other party happy. This is probably brought about by the young one's grief, old man Yi bitterly thought. What meaning do Martial Nephew's words hold? Could it be that you believe this elder is one who breaks his promises and doesn't keep his words? This elder won't cheat Martial Nephew of the promised items even the slightest. When old man Yi heard Han Li's words, not only was he unhappy, he had also stiffened his face and wore an expression of honor. His appearance expressed that he wouldn't do such actions of lowly character. Hearing this, Han Li's reluctant smile nearly fell apart. This elder's face was quite thick. He obviously intended to renege on the majority of goods. Even so, he insisted on keeping up the false appearance of uprightly keeping his promise. He was truly a typical hypocrite. And Li repeatedly restrained himself and incessantly cursed inwardly. However, his face's smile was slightly delayed. He changed his expression to one of sincerity and used a tone of voice even he found sickening to say, Martial Uncle is blaming this younger generation wrongly. Actually, Martial Nephew thought that since Martial Nephew had just entered the sect, the promised items were far too extravagant for this junior. As a result, Martial Uncle would temporarily withhold the majority of goods so that this junior would not waste them. After hearing Han Li's empty words, old man Yi's expression was eased. He faintly nodded his head and said, Martial Nephew Han's words truly have some sense. If a newly admitted disciple became too dependent on these mere worldly possessions, it would truly hinder his cultivation. Then let us act according to your words. The majority of the goods will temporarily be left with me. If you have a need for them in the future, do not hesitate to come take them. Then thank you for your trouble, Martial Uncle. Han Li wore a strong smile and consoled his heart repeatedly. These were merely worldly possessions. He couldn't afford to offend the old man in front of him. Later, when there was an opportunity, he would definitely return to collect both principal and interest. This is nothing. Let us go. The old man's mood seemed to turn for the better. The following matter was much easier. With this Martial Uncle Yi's assistance, Han Li smoothly went through all the formalities and took the Jade medallion, representing his assignment. Then he was enthusiastically led by an honored disciple to the Azure Stone Mountain Range's 100 Medicine Garden. Old man Yi stood at the entrance of the 100 Opportunities Hall and saw Han Li's figure gradually fly off to the distance. His complexion was gloomy as he remained silent. It seemed he was thinking of something. Has Junior Marshal Brother Yi's heart gone soft? A deep voice suddenly came from behind him. It is not a question of whether my heart has gone soft. Rather, using these methods to deal with a disciple that had just entered the sect feels somewhat improper. Not only does this martial nephew Han say one thing, he inwardly thinks another. He may report this to sect master. The old man didn't say anything else, but his words carried a faint unease. He report, the person behind him sneered. What? Is Senior Marshal Brother Wu not uneasy? Old Man Yi eventually turned around, saying these words to a somber Senior Marshal Brother Wu. What is there to worry about? This boy is not aware of the arrangements we made beforehand. Say that the goods were left with you. Don't say that you won't give it to him, but that they were temporarily in your care. What reason would there to be to report? Marshal Brother Wu said, having thought it out. However, I quite admire this boy. His age is young, yet he understands when to advance or retreat. This is remarkable. If he didn't have such poor aptitude with his false spiritual roots, I would have truly felt the notion to have him enter the sect. Marshal Brother Wu continued, his face exposing an appearance of regret. Luckily, this person doesn't have a rigid way of thinking, otherwise we would have to use a different trick. That would be far more inconvenient. Old Man Yi said leisurely. Enough, these is nothing to be uneasy about this boy. Us two will pinch our noses and think of him like we would think of an ant. Junior Marshal Brother Yi need not waste so much money. However, don't forget what we agreed on in advance. Senior Marshal Brother Wu suddenly changed the topic. His words also held some hidden meaning. I will not forget. I will give you half of this newly refined qi gathering pill. Key. To tell the truth, if my grandnephew wasn't in the middle of becoming foundation establishment and required the assistance of large quantities of precious medicine pills, I truly would not have such thick face to trick a junior in this way. Old Man Yi lightly shook his head, looking like he lost his integrity with age. When Old Man Wu heard these words, he smiled and did not speak. With great satisfaction, he thought to himself, since this Junior Marshal Brother Yi has just committed an underhanded act, it could be considered something I could use to handle him. I don't have to worry about discussing business with him in the future. He will not oppose me.